Hey, moderators, how's my sound? I was hearing an echo when I did a little mini video a minute ago, but I'm not hearing it now. Sounds pretty good to me. Excellent. Awesome. Oh, we got a good one today, guys. Coffee's always good. The company's always good. I'm glad the audio's good. And during my long intro, I was going through this book from 1896. It's a big one. This ain't a small one. This is nothing but quotes in micro print. This is some real small print. But this is a quote book from 1896. Cheryl does our merchandising. This is a local Cheryl, not the Cheryl that you guys become from, not a front row seat. This is a different Cheryl. One of our friends locally. And she came across a bunch of old books and brought them to me. Oh, I got something to show you guys. Remember, Smithsonian tried to say that they never employed these guys that found those Egyptian ruins in the Grand Canyon, Egyptian artifacts, a whole complex. Yeah, they tried to say for like 60 years. It's not true. Those men never worked for us. They got caught. Somebody else has a really interesting YouTube video showing, excuse me, old Smithsonian documents that verify that those two archaeologists were indeed employed by the Smithsonian institution. Excuse me. So I find it really interesting that among this box of books were all the 1908, 1909, 1910, 1911 to 1913 Smithsonian Institute hardback books, which are basically compilations of all their magazines for those years. So I was flipping through them, was like, wow, somebody really held on to these books. So I have them now in the Archaics library. I'll be digging. The 1909 one is the biggest one, and that's the one that 1909, or maybe they published it in the 1910. I have that one too, about the Egyptian ruins in the Grand Canyon. I'll go through it and see what it says. I think I saw some pictures when I was flipping through it. So we had to limit the ticket sales for North Carolina to 50 because it's a private residence on the side of a mountain outside of Asheville, North Carolina. We just can't. They can't accommodate more than that. So food and drink and entertainment, all that for as long as we're all there is in the ticket price. I think the tickets were like $70, $75, something like that. There's only 3 of those tickets left. I mean, it's almost as soon as we posted that. It's not a venue; it's a private residence, so we just can't take more than they can handle. But Virginia Beach is another matter. Sold a lot of tickets to Virginia Beach already, but we're nowhere near the end of selling them like we are for Asheville. All right. I've been busting my ass in Archaics Academy. Those of you who have already paid for the full not the scholarship, but for the full program, you'll be getting your flash drives pretty soon. Your first flash drives, you'll be getting 2 flash drives. The first one's coming. It's going to keep you real busy. Everyone else will soon be able to start downloading whatever interests you. But like I said, if you think my videos have a lot of information, wait till you see the data itself and how it's presented and the recommended reading, the additional PDFs, all the additional stuff. The additional stuff is just for you. It's just for you to say, man, I've got this information from Archaics. It's for you to be able to learn it if you want. But it's the actual courses. I'm thinking they're about They're in between 7 and 12 pages each. But my pages are packed full of information. You guys know I abbreviate. Abbreviation and the condensation of information is an art. We have to reduce things to their lowest common denominator so we can get to the fundamentals. And that's what Archaics Academy is about. Archaics Academy is about getting that education that no one can ever deceive you again. That you can listen to any public speaker. You can go to any venue. You can go before anyone who's giving a presentation, and you're going to be able to ascertain between fact and fiction just based off what you're. This is what Archaics Academy is about. It is about putting the power of perception and the information, showing how data sets are created and how they literally dismantle false paradigms. This is what it's about. And no one needs to be overwhelmed. Download them one at a time. I get it. Or some people like to pay for it all the way up front. We're going to extend the ability for people to save that $250. Because a lot of people have taken advantage of that. We're going to extend that. I was going to stop it as soon as the downloads were available, but I'm going to extend that because the people who have paid for the full program up front are going to be receiving it in two parts. The first part is we're mailing them all thumb drives with what they purchased, and then it's so much that a second thumb drive will come in the weeks to follow. So that's how it's going down. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some people by the end of the year that are getting their certificates and their Archaics Masters coins. I wouldn't be surprised. All right. Jamie Bandy, I go to California every year. I'll be in San Diego. It'll be toward the latter part of the year, last 3 months of the year. I'll be in San Diego. I may go to LA or something. I don't know. All right. Hey, Lee Parker. Yeah, I see you all over the Twitter, man. All over X. All right. We got over 1,000 people in the chat. Yeah, I have heard of Robert Edward Grant. I haven't had a chance. I'm so busy. I have not had a chance to look at his material. All right. Wearing this Egyptian shirt because that's what we're going to be talking about, guys. We need to address ancient Egypt. We need to separate this. We need to get to the bottom of this idea that people have that the Egyptians had these weird belief systems and all that. And this derives from the fact that their artwork was very stylized. And these anthropomorphic deities that were all humanoid but had different animal faces and all. Listen, there's nothing. Look at my shirt. There's nothing mysterious about it when you look through the world through the eyes of an Egyptian. There's nothing mysterious about it. I've been trying to show since the inception of my channel that what I have brought to the table is so shocking to the conscience because the Phoenix history has been scrubbed from most of the history books. Enough of it has been found in pieces that we were able to put a lot of it back together. And that's what this video is about, showing you how incredible this information is through the series of multiple resets. We have a period of our history. I know there's a lot of people think there's a missing 1,000 years, and I'm not on board with any of that. As a chronologist, I can show every decade, I can show every century and what was happening in different parts of the world. But what I do agree with is, like, recently, my lunch break did a video where they were showing the population extrapolation data and going backwards in time from the population that we have now, taking into consideration other variables, went back all the way to the 4th, 5th, and 6th century AD as a period when we had zero population. I found that very compelling. The reason I find it compelling is because 522 AD, by multiple different species of analysis I've shown from different perspectives, I have 2 whole playlists that conclude this. My Anuna Files playlist on the Nemesis X object history and my Phoenix playlist on the Phoenix phenomenon, 138-year periodicity. They both, the only time in history, and I've looked 8,000 years into the before 5239 BC when the Archaics chronology begins. I've looked 8,000 years into the past. I've looked 6,000 years into the future, beyond 2106 AD, the Archaics chronology. Nothing. Never again do the Nemesis X object and the Phoenix object appear in the same year ever again. It's only in 1 year in all of world history, and it was in the year 522, and that's where things get really, really interesting. Remember, in 522 AD, we didn't have an Anno Domini calendar. We didn't have an AD BC system. We were still under the older Roman Julian system. The Byzantine calendar was a little different. The Armenian calendar was a little different from that. We had multiple different, the Saka calendar was still in effect. The Islamic Hijra calendar had not yet been started. There were many calendrical systems operative in the time. The Buddhic calendar was still operative as well. Very interesting that the Buddhic calendar was the Phoenix cycle calendar of 552 years. But the Vatican, as I've shown in a video, and I cited the original source materials, the Vatican had an agent that created a new calendar for the sole purpose of doing away with any knowledge of the 552-year Phoenix cycle. And they successfully did that. The reason I know this is because most of you don't even know what I'm talking about. The AD BC system that we're under today was specifically invented to obfuscate, to hide that knowledge. It's also the only year, 522 AD, is the only year that the Nemesis X object and Phoenix were here in the same year. And it started 25 years of absolute chaos. It's called the Justinian Plague period, or the Justinian Darkness period. It is when the Dark Ages began. What are the Dark Ages? Well, I'm going to tell you. Our world was hammered with reset after reset after reset after reset for a period of 1,000 years until the 16th century. We just started, you call it the Renaissance. We just started coming out of this period. But I have so many documented fragments of odd, weird things that were happening all over the world during that 1,000-year period. After the infrastructure of Rome had fragmented and collapsed, the world just plummeted into darkness, and it was universal. It wasn't just the Roman. It wasn't just the exterior provincial areas. It was the entire world, from the Mediterranean to the Americas. Even the Mayan civilizations were completely wiped out. And I can show this as happening on Phoenix years. It's very compelling. 1,000 years. It's not that we're missing 1,000 years. It's that we had the shit beat out of us for 1,000 years, and then something let up. Something let up. 1350 was the last big one. Then all of a sudden in 1488, things lightened up. Came out of the Middle Ages, Renaissance took over, literacy taken over, the printing press was invented. Now all of a sudden humans, remember, it only takes us 200 years to go from horse and buggy to Hadron Collider. But we've been getting the crap beat out of us with reset after reset after reset, all kinds of things. And it's not just resets, but it's invasions, it's plagues. You would not believe the loss of human life just from the plagues that happened over and over and over in that 1,000-year period. Military historian William Brambley wrote in his book, The Gods of Eden, that it was over a 500-year period. It was a very popular prayer before you ate your meals at night to basically just say, God save us from the comet, from the Turks, and from the plague. That was a prayer. And everybody on Europe was saying it in all their different languages. This is how bad it got. It got to where the oversoul wasn't anything to be glorified or even experienced. Life had literally become, for over 1,000 years, nothing but a dismal existence where any interaction with God was simply begging to not be killed by the comet, by the Turks, or by the plague. And the Khans, and the Huns, and the Mongols. It's this 1,000 years is where you get your Tartarian narrative. This 1,000 years is full of resets, mud floods, violence, and human depopulations. It's also full of experiences written in different local records all over the world of a strange red star that appeared over and over and over, and it created phenomena. For some, like 230,000 people on the coast of Norway, it created tsunamis that washed whole communities out to sea, never to be seen again. For others, it was an octagonal star in the sky that produced phenomena, and fires erupted all over Europe. And sometimes, a whole lot of people just vanished. Once in the historical record, which gave birth to the Pied Piper of Hamelin stories that erupted all over Europe. Once, the only people that vanished were children, and all the adults were mystified, and the church itself and the monarchies were at a loss to explain what happened. So they invented a backstory to explain why hundreds of thousands of European children suddenly vanished. The historians that have studied this declare white slavery was alive and prolific throughout the Mediterranean and Central Asian steppes, but it cannot account for what happened in the year 1212 AD, a phoenix year. It can't account for that. Murder, disease, nothing can account for the massive disappearance of these children. So the church invented the Children's Crusade, inventing a story that all these kids got together and decided that since they were the true children of God and their parents couldn't defeat the Muslims and take back Jerusalem in the Crusades, they themselves would embark on a crusade. But the historians that have looked into this matter know that that's not true. No armies of children were ever seen marching toward the ports. How would they even got passage on a ship? How would they even made the overland journey to Jerusalem? It was just a cover story to explain something that was unexplainable. So we're going to start with ancient Egypt here. And I'm going to make, though, even my Archaics veterans are going to have some aha moments. The Phoenix phenomenon is very deep, but it was a knowledge that was preserved from a world before our own. And we had to put it together in fragments. A lot of these things that the mythographers say and the traditionalists say, they've never made sense before. But when we put them all together, we see the full picture and we understand, wow, they knew. How do we know they knew? Because they predicted on multiple occasions when the Phoenix was going to return and what it was going to do. And they even knew how to survive it. It's very, very compelling data. We're going to get to it right now, guys. Let me check my chat. Hey, Mr. Shiva Shampoo, Jamie Robbins, Dawn Hart. I see a bunch of Pamela Swan. There's all my mods. Fellow Traveler, Didgeridoo. Did I say that right? Wendy Flores, never late. You guys should have saw the first time Wendy met me in Fort Worth. Asked her to sit down and she almost blew up. Cherry Red. Squirrel Sniper, Mr. C. That's what I like about this community. I got some really active mods. Jamie Robbins. Oh, there's my buddy, Rhino. Face Diaper. The strangest name on all of YouTube, but really a cool dude. I met him in the flesh. I met him, another Big John, and Jamie Robbins was kicking it with us. We were all hanging around Jen Begler. Let's see, she's probably building a NASCAR engine right about now. All right. Really interesting people in the Archaics community, guys. Really interesting people. All right. Oh, Shivites Jagnarth, you've been around for a long time, man. Might have to throw you a wrench. I do recognize names. You guys already know I do go through my comment sections every single day. I do answer comments that I feel compelled to answer. So it's the only two places I do that is on X and right here on YouTube. And yes, I do block trolls. I have zero tolerance policy. I do not entertain negativity at all. Nelson Perez. I think you're the last one I didn't mention. Yeah, man. Got my new archaic sign up there. It's individual. You can't tell, but it's individual letters. I thought it was pretty cool. Each individual letter is sold. They got a whole wall full of letters. You buy whatever letters you need for whatever sign you need to put together. It's literally 7 different little metal. It's all license plate metal. It's pretty cool. I might go back and buy some more. Spell some other stuff. All right. 1,500 people in the chat. Hey, the Terrence Howard video took off, didn't it? 65,000 views. Then I went on with Nino, and I added a lot more that I did not put in my original video. I added with Nino, and in Nino's video, I showed some video clips. You know, pretty compelling stuff, man. These actors are into some deep shit. Yeah, I'm not into that stuff, man. I told you guys I'm not into the spirit possession, demon possession stuff now, man. No good. Nathaniel Peters, hey, I'm just not in it. I'm not in it, man. And to hear these actors just openly talk about it like it's just normal, and yeah, man, come on. You're a little too glib. You're a little too glib. It's crazy. So these what is it? Egypt is known for its palm trees all up and down the Nile. Did you know those are called phoenixes? Did you know phoenix palms are from Egypt? Now, people have exported them and brought them to America, and they've taken them to different places, but the absolute origin of the phoenix palm, it's a palm tree. The phoenix palm tree comes from Egypt. In ancient times, that palm tree was sacred to Thoth. Thoth is the scribe of the gods, messenger of the gods. The individual fronds of the palm were used in the ancient Egyptian reckoning of times. You can learn this from Gerald Massey, 1880s. You can learn this from Robert Graves, undisputed authority on all Greek antiquities. And when you're going deep on Greek antiquities, you must do the Egyptian crossover because it's there. So there's a lot of interesting things about Egypt, such as, you know, Christians think they're the only one that has a Holy Spirit. But you must not know Egyptian theology, because the great spirit of Egypt is Neph, K-N-E-P-H. There is no distinction to the Egyptian, to the great spirit of Neph, the spirit of the Creator, the spirit of the Amen, the hidden one. There is no difference to the ancient Egyptian than to the fundamentalist Southern Baptist Christian today who regards the Holy Spirit in awe and in reverence. There's no difference. Neph is a very curious word. There are biblical scholars that have identified the word Neph in Genesis in the phrase, and darkness covered the face of the deep. I've told you guys many times, the book of Genesis is not about a beginning. It is about a total systemic reset. And we know, my Archaics veterans do, in the year 3895 BC, year one of the Anno Mundi calendar, the first year of the pre-flood world of Genesis, 1656 years to the Great Flood. 3895 BC was a Phoenix year. And in that year, Phoenix appeared as a fiery, revolving sword in the sky. This is how it was described. Now, Phoenix passed over the face of the deep. Biblical scholars have seen that this word, neph, is found in this phrase. But it's an Egyptian word. And it's the exact same word as fink. Neph and fink are the exact same words. But fink is Druidic, and it's the precise reverse of neph. Fink is phoenix to the Celts and the Druids. It's Phenc. I've shown this in many of my presentations on the phoenix. So we have this idea in ancient Egypt that a spirit that can create darkness and yet revive a world that has been ruined is Neph, this holy spirit. And we find this in the most ancient Egyptian traditions. The reverse being the Druidic fink should not surprise you. Archaics veterans already know where this is going when it comes to the mirroring of Egyptian words and how on the north side of the Mediterranean, the reverse of Egyptian words becomes the names of Greek gods and Greek cities. I will show this. The Heliopolitan cult. This is the priesthood cult of ancient Egypt, northern Egypt. It was at the foot of the Great Pyramid. At the foot of the Great Pyramid developed a priesthood at the city of Anu, Annu. Later on, this city in Egyptian was called On, O-N. The Greeks called the same city Heliopolis. So Heliopolis literally means the metropolis of the sun. And in the metropolis of the sun, near the Great Pyramid, was a temple complex called the Mansion of the Phoenix. Inside the Mansion of the Phoenix was a miniature replica of the Great Pyramid called the Benu stone. The Benu stone was supposed to have been some secret of the creator, and it identified the temple Mansion of the Phoenix. It was a link between the missing capstone on the Great Pyramid and the concept of Phoenix. So why would the ancient Egyptians venerate the Phoenix? Why would the ancient Egyptians build a temple near the foot of the Great Pyramid and link it through the Benu stone to that structure? The Benu stone being the size of the capstone that was needed for the top of the pyramid when the pyramid was complete, which it's never been done. Remember, the stone the builders rejected implies the structure was never finished. So the Heliopolitan cult, the metropolis of the sun in northern Egypt, they have a very ancient cosmology. Excuse me, I'm coughing a lot today, guys. I forgot to drink my mullein tea last night. So in the Heliopolitan cosmology, we find that the whole concept of the Mansion of the Phoenix cosmology was imported to a most ancient site called Edfu in deeper Egypt. At Edfu, which had been rebuilt by the Greek Macedonian kings of Egypt, at Edfu, on the reliefs, we find out that in the beginning, during the Zeptepi, which is the first time, before Egypt existed, there were 10 divine rulers. This is what we find. They were called the Neteru. Now, 10 divine rulers. This sounds just like the Sumerian king list. Remember, on the Sumerian prisms, we have a dynasty of ancient Sumer of 10 kings. Then we have an opposing dynasty of 7 Anunnaki kings on the Sumerian king list. It was a dynasty of 10 and a dynasty of 7 that ruled 5 cities called the Sumerian Pentapolis. So we have this power struggle before the flood. It seems to be right here, Zep-Tepi, the first time. The 10 divinities, same thing Genesis says, but it calls them the 10 patriarchs. Genesis also copies the 10-7 model. There is a genealogy of there's a genealogy of Seth that has seven in the line. Then there is a genealogy of 10 from Adam to Noah. So both of these genealogies are found and named, and each participant is named in Genesis. The Genesis pre-flood story mirrors the Sumerian in concept, and now we're finding the Egyptian does too. Now, very interestingly, this Heliopolitan cosmology declares that in the Zep-Tepi time, the first time, before the Neteru were established, the 10 divine rulers, the world was visited by the Pen God, PN deity. This PN deity appeared, and it was a violent conflict before the first creation of the world. An enemy appeared in the sky in the form of a dragon known as the Great Leaping One. And as a consequence, the devastation was so total that every living thing died. This is the Egyptian belief system as to the world that existed before Zep-Tepi, which was the Genesis pre-flood world. So before the pre-flood world, we have an episode where the world is fully populated with men and animals. And then the PN deity appears and wipes everything out in the form of a dragon in the sky. This Egyptian tradition provides no date, but it does provide conceptually when it happened, before the Adam and Eve reset, or the Adam and Eve Genesis beginning. Remember, it's a new heavens and new earth. That doesn't mean a creation event. It means that the destruction was so total that it literally created a new biosphere, a whole new topography, and a whole new sky. So the few surviving humans, the Adamu and Kava, the first peoples, the Jews turned them into pronouns, into Adam and Eve. They weren't literal people. They are the embodiment of concepts of peoples. This is what we find in the Babylonian and Amorite cuneiform. We find that humans were called by the distinct word Adamu. And it implied that they had been made from red earth. Remember, red earth seems to be the origin of people who have lost their entire infrastructure. We're going somewhere with this. So we have this Pen deity, but in Egyptian, Pen and Phene are the same thing. The Pen in Egyptian is the same as Phene in Greek, Phoen in English, Phene. So we have this Pen deity, and the Pen deity story was taught by the priests in the mansion of the Phoenix. Figure that one out. So what's the Pen deity? PN dash God. That's what it's called in the Egyptian text, the Pen God, the Pen deity. So we have this link here. We have this in the priestly college of the mansion of the Phoenix. We have a teaching that the Phoenix visited a world before present humankind and wiped it out, meaning Genesis is not a creation event at all. As I've shown multiple presentations, it is a systemic reset that was so perfect that it literally started a new heavens, a new earth, and a new timeline. What's that timeline? It's the Anno Mundi timeline that was famous in the ancient world. So this is what we have. Mansion of the Phoenix has the Ben. It's where astronomer priests taught the Heliopolitan concept of recurring cycles and calendars that were literally of cyclical nature. This is the philosophy. This is what these ancient Egyptian priests believed, that ages occurred in cycles and that time was cyclical, and that these cycles were intrinsically connected to the archaic Benu bird. It's a bird. The archaic Benu bird was the sign that one cycle had ended and a new cycle had begun. And Robert Graves had found it, he published this, he found it odd that the ancient Egyptian concept of the Benu bird was a purple-plumed phoenix in the Greek tradition. So when the Egyptian priests told these stories and the Greeks listened to them, the Greeks translated as a purple-plumed, a purplish, which is red, red and blue, a purplish feathered phoenix. This is what the Greeks saw when they listened to the Egyptian stories. The Benu bird was celestial, only appearing in the sky. It wasn't an actual bird. Only 1,000 or so years later did the late Greeks and early Romans start writing ridiculous things about Phoenix being a bird that actually visited Egypt. It's stupid. The ancient Egyptian concept was that the Benu bird was like a dragon that appeared in the sky, no different than the Native American thunderbird. This is what they believed. And they also think that the Benu bird wasn't just responsible for the death of the world prior to Zep-Tepi. It was also responsible for the complete death of Zep-Tepi as well. Zep-Tepi is the first time. It's when the 10 Neteru ruled the 10 deities that we know of as the 10 kings. They're in many, many traditions. In my published books, I list a whole bunch of cultures that all mention the 10 king dynasty and how it's opposed to the 7 king dynasty. It is an ancient story for which is embedded within our prophetic eschatology. Our prophetic narratives found in the book of Revelation. What do they say? Again, the 7 kings are coming. What are they going to do? They're going to overturn a 10 king power structure. This is clearly laid out in the book of Revelation. So I ain't checked my chat in a minute. I very rarely have any breaks anymore. Breaks in my signal, but it's happened in the past to where I was running my mouth for a long time and nobody heard me. Check my chat. Hello, Lacey. Trillion Phoenix. Wow, that's a name. All right. A lot of familiar names. Riyadh Ali. Reality hurts. I've been seeing your comments, man. I've been seeing them about the guy that translates Greek and all that. I just haven't had time. My life is not my own. A lot of times I don't have time to look into all these things. I'll get to it eventually. All right. Yeah, the Zep Tepi was the golden age to the ancient Egyptians. So in the Egyptian Heliopolitan cosmology, which was the biggest priesthood of ancient Egypt at the time, and it literally ran the whole Giza complex, all the pyramids, the Sphinx, everything going on there was controlled by the priests of the mansion of the Phoenix. So this is the ancient Egyptian city called Anu, Annu, later called On in the Bible. It's the city of On in the Bible, On. The Greeks always called it the metropolis of the sun, Heliopolis. Now, interestingly, there are archaeologists, there are historians that are convinced that the Benben stone itself was a pyramidion that was carved out of a meteorite. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just telling you this is in the history books. The same thing is said as like a shard of a meteorite is also found in the Kaaba of Islam. I don't know. This is just what's in the books. So the Egyptians believed that the disappearances and the appearances of the divine Benu bird, which the Greeks referred to as phoenix, Fink, the Indo-Iranian descendants being, these ancient Greeks, they wrote from left to right. Other cultures wrote from right to left or from top to bottom. So the phonetics were often switched. And I've shown many examples of this. It's very common in the ancient world, but many Egyptian words in their reverse are Greek pronouns. It's very interesting. So this is a reference to the ancient Egyptian Nof, in reverse is Fink. So it's the same thing. We're talking about Phoenix as a spirit or a spirit dragon that appears in the sky, celestial. So to the Egyptians, they taught that this Benu bird, Benu referring to the pyramidion, but it's the phoenix. This Benu bird was linked to violent cosmic cycles and to the destruction and rebirth of world ages. Introduce the phoenix cycle. So there's an ancient Egyptian papyrus, but it's written in Greek and it's dated as a copy from an older text from the time of Amenhotep. Amenhotep had a few names, but he was Amenhotep at first, or I believe, and he became Amenhotep became Amenetin and then Akhenaten. Yeah. But anyway, it reads, "For in the Typhon time, the sun is veiled or darkened." Now, that's interesting because we have a new name here, Typhon. Would Typhon be the Benu bird? Would Typhon be the phoenix? Because with the TY, we have an indefinite article here, but we definitely have phon, Phon, the same thing as fiend. But we can't just go by structure and phonetics. Typhon is phoenix, but for totally different reasons. We'll get to that in a minute. This Heliopolitan cosmology is very, very interesting because the ancient Egyptians had a pantheon, the Ogdoad, and they had the Aeneid. They had these pantheons that are ancient, and they go back to the time of Zep Tepi. Perhaps they're just all they did was personalize or anthropomorphize phenomena like the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth, winds, things like that. I don't know. I'm gonna let Robert Graves and Massey and Campbell and a bunch of other people who are experts in that over 100 years ago explain that. I really don't care. In this presentation, what's relevant is the fact is after the Egyptian gods were already old, The priesthood that were the stewards of the pyramid complex, the priesthood that were the stewards of the mansion of the phoenix, protectors of the Benu stone that was sacred to the Benu bird of cosmic cycles of destruction. This priesthood here introduced a new god into the Egyptian pantheon at the end of a long history of Egyptian gods. This new god was the sun. This new god was the son of Osiris, named Horus. So this is very compelling. In the Chester Beatty Papyrus, we have the appearance of Horus at the very end of the Egyptian pantheon, and he astonishes the other gods. They're like, how is this possible? How is a new god even being born? And to be born, it's very interesting, the backstory that's given to Horus. The sun suddenly appears. How did the Egyptians not know what the sun was? How did the Egyptians not have a solar deity? How? I'm going to explain it to you. My Archaics veterans already know where I'm going. But after the Cataclysm, when Zep-Tepi collapsed, when Zep-Tepi and the dynasty of 10 kings were gone, suddenly a new god appears in the sky. You can't miss him. He's the sun. But where has the sun been during the entire time of Zep-Tepi? Where? Because it was unknown and unseen. And when it first appeared after the great flood of the Bible that ended the first time, the dynasty of the 10 kings and the Anunnaki 7 kings, the great flood that happened in 2239 BC, ending the 1,656 years of the antediluvian world, which started with a phoenix cataclysm that created a new heavens and a new earth in the year 3895 BC. This 1656 years is known in ancient books everywhere. I've cited many of them. It was very well known. It is divisible by 138. 138 times 12 is the entire length of the 10 patriarchs found in the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis preserves for us the phoenix in more ways than you know, as I'll show you. So, the backstory that was given to Horus as to how he suddenly appeared is that he fought Set in the skies. Remember, in the book of Genesis, Set and his descendants, the Sethites, were those who made up the 10 king dynasty. They were the Sethites. It was the Canaanites that were of the 7 king dynasty. The Canaanites were the ones who were the metal workers. They were the rulers. They were the administrators, vast canal works. They built whole cities. This is the same thing the Sumerian king list tells us. The Sumerian king list tells us they built the manufacturing and metallurgy city of Bad Tabira. They built the shipping districts of Larak. They built, there's 5 cities, Shurapak, Sapar. Sapar was the library city. It was the city of knowledge. We know where it is. Sapar, after the flood, became Saqqara. Then Saqqara became Saqqara. It is the Giza complex in Egypt, the largest collection of books in the world. But books are containers of knowledge. I'm not talking about what you're looking at behind me. Now, we have Horus appearing suddenly after the flood, after the Egyptian pantheon is already established, astonishing the Egyptian gods. But they can't not let him in the pantheon. So he enters in as the last of the Egypt's gods, Horus, the son of Osiris. And he gained entry into the pantheon because he defeated Set. Set in Egypt is the exact same word as Typhon in Greek. This isn't Jason. I'm not stretching. I'm not making anything up. Any encyclopedia on mythology will tell you that Set and Typhon are the same deity, same concept. So here we have Set being defeated. And when you look up Set, you find out he's the bringer of darkness. Typhon, the bringer of darkness. What does Phoenix do? It darkens the sun. This is what it does. Phoenix is not the moon. We're not talking about, for all those new to my channel, we're not talking about eclipses. And the ancients weren't talking about eclipses either. An eclipse does not darken the sun and the whole world. It only darkens a small little tiny piece of the world. What was happening in these episodes were the entire hemisphere going black. Totally different phenomenon. So, check my chat real quick. So we have this Egyptian god that suddenly appears, Horus, from which we get our hours from. Hours of the day, but Horus appears and defeats Typhon and clears the skies. Now the sun is holding dominion. It's exactly what we find in the anthropological record all over the world. Now all the dynasties switch their names. Now they're the children of the sun. Their enemies are the children of Set. Yeah, they're all. The children of the sun dynasties explode everywhere. Everybody's a son of the sun. We have massive Heliolithic maritime empire. What is Heliolithic? Heliolithic are the sun empires that are building megalithic cities and metropolises all over the place within 200 years after the Great Flood. Remember, in the rabbinical writings, I've showed you guys, in the rabbinical writings, it actually tells the truth. Genesis is a oversimplification. There was not a single family who survived on a single ark that had all the animals in the world and survived. That's not true. The rabbinical records say that fleets of arks of gigantic size were built. And whole cultures got on their arks and they survived. Others went underground. Others went and hid in the mountains or in the caves. Many, many people survived the Great Flood. Many people survived. And the Great Flood wasn't the whole world. Flooding happened all over the world, but the whole world wasn't flooded. There's all kinds of high places that people could have been to, or even low valleys and all that were inaccessible by water. Places that were like just blocked off in high walls of mountains. So the tempest steel of Pharaoh Amhos, who later became Amenhotep II, the tempest steel says that a great darkness engulfed the entire Western Hemisphere. A storm followed. The sky was unleashed. Houses and shelters were floating on the water. It says that no one was able to even light a torch after the power of the god was manifested. Now, Amenhotep is really interesting, but he's also referred to as, get this, that's his dynastic name, but he has a throne name that's also found in the Egyptian papyri. Guess what it is? Amenhotep was also called Amenophis. Amen, and Nophis. Nophis in Egypt was the winged disc. Where have we seen the winged disc? Oh my God, has Zecharia Sitchin effed up a whole generation of researchers. Over and over and over, Zecharia Sitchin showed the red disc with the wings coming off of it that's found everywhere in Egyptian art is no different than the disc with the little guy Ninurta on top with the wings flying in Assyrian, Babylonian, and Akkadian art. They are one and the same. It is, the winged disc has never been a symbol for the sun. This is how they cover up the phoenix. The winged disc is the phoenix. The phoenix is even found in the Old Testament, where it specifically says, and I did ride upon a cherub, yea, I did ride upon the wings of the wind. In the Psalms, we read about the cherub, and the cherub has wings, and the rider himself is whoever the king is at that time. He's enjoying. This is the origin of the caribou. Caribou are the sphinx of ancient Assyria. It shows these bulls with these wings. All these symbols develop out of each other, but they maintain basically the same meaning. Meaning, the bull was a symbol for kingship. Now, in ancient Egypt, the winged disc became one of the greatest of royal seals. They sealed their wax scrolls with the winged disc. Yeah, people were scared. They were scared to undo the Nophis. Nophis is nothing but phoenix. It's the exact same word. So this pharaoh had a throne name and a dynastic name. One was Amenhotep, and the other one was Amenophis. Basically, the hidden phoenix. So his name literally meant the winged disc. So Nophis encompasses the Egyptian word neph. Neph is the exact opposite of the Druid word fink. Again, it's the phoenix. So it was this pharaoh that wrote in the Typhon time, Typhon indefinite article plus phoenix. In the Typhon time, the sun is darkened, is veiled. So these are just points of interest. I'm just showing you guys that the Egyptians knew all about the phoenix. They knew about the phoenix being a cycle. They knew about the phoenix cycle. They knew the phoenix was specifically linked. They didn't know why, but they knew the phoenix was specifically linked to that gigantic structure that was nearby, the Great Pyramid of Giza. So important was this knowledge to ancient Egypt that they literally built a temple called the Mansion of the Phoenix to protect the Ben stone. And they didn't really even know why. They just knew it was intrinsic. It was very important that they kept this knowledge. But something else happened. We have first of all over the world, the Children of the Sun dynasties erupted. How do we know? W.J. Perry's book that I shared with you guys, 551 pages of anthropological, historical, and archaeological research that shows that all the dynasties of the world all of a sudden just started worshiping the sun, regarding the sun, developing solar calendars. And we know from the writings of Thomas Campbell, we know from the writings of Gerald Massey, we know from the writings of the erudite Robert Graves. We know from these men that prior to the solar calendars, it was lunar and stellar calendars only for a long period of time. Why? Where was the sun? What happened to the sun that you wouldn't record time by it? It's the brightest object in the sky. So it's the most noticeable moving object in the sky. Why would all these cultures ignore the sun? Well, I'm going to tell you, because they couldn't see it. The vapor canopy world, this is another fundamental aspect of the Phoenix research. We have a world in which Phoenix brings and collapses vapor canopies. Vapor canopies are created very fast and they're destroyed equally fast. Vapor canopies are created when volcanoes, submarine volcanoes, and volcanic flues above sea level are venting. The mesosphere instantly increases in moisture, in dust particulates, pumice and ash. The red dust particulates coming from Phoenix blanket the upper mesosphere. Within weeks or months, a vapor canopy will block out the sun. The sun can be noticed by the brightening of the canopy, but you can't actually see the sun. And the thicker the canopy, the more the atmospheric pressure increases. Volcanism creates ambient radiation. We already know from 1902, just exposure to volcanic ambient radiation will cause a human in their 60s to grow 2 inches. Yeah, that's just amazing, guys. It's amazing because the Phoenix The Phoenix data answers so many mysteries of the ancient world. The entire vapor canopy phenomenon and cycle of the Phoenix phenomenon is evidenced in the fact that our northern and southern extremities of our world, we have 2-mile-high snowpacks. Where did it come from? Did you know that right now, Antarctica and the North Pole, it doesn't even snow half an inch a year? There are 59 different variations of Ice Age theory because they can't figure out how in the hell, what mechanics created these 2-mile-high snowpacks. I'm going to tell you how it happened. It happened in a day. That's where the vapor canopy is right now. Vapor canopies come and go, but it doesn't change. It doesn't change at all. Sea level is static, and it never goes up and down behind vapor canopies. The necessary moisture for a vapor canopy is already here. It's in the form of snow, but it hasn't snowed enough to create that much 2-mile-high snowpack, and scientists recognize this. So they come up with these really interesting theories trying to make sense of a world they don't understand. And that is Ice Age. Ice Age is total bullshit. It's absolute farce. When a vapor canopy collapses, it all that moisture at the colder extremities condenses into snow, falls. It's fast. How do we know it's fast? Because the animals that get caught at the northern and southern extremities flash freeze. That's how we know it's fast. We have 3 million megafauna carcasses that are in the permafrost that can be warmed up and fed to sled dogs today. There are still people in Siberia who routinely dig out the ice and eat giant tree sloths, bison, wild pig, huge woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceros. This has been going on for centuries. In Russia, it's never stopped. It's going on today. There are people right now with mammoth meat in their meat lockers in Siberia right now. They're not going to ignore this massive food supply. All that was flash frozen. For hundreds of years, the ivory that appeared in Asia, in Europe, in China didn't come from Africa. It came from Siberia. They've been mining that ivory from those mammoth fields for centuries now. So more evidence that the vapor canopies collapse and become our ice packs. The proof is in the maps. How do you get 15th century and 16th century Turkish navigator maps that accurately show the subsurface topography under 2 miles of snow? How do you get maps that show exactly where the mountains, where the valleys, and where the rivers are, and the contours of the coasts? They're covered in 2-mile snowpacks. Who made these maps? The maps are legitimate. They've been studied. Many alternative historians are always talking about these maps, and most of them say some really dumb shit, like Graham Hancock. Oh yeah, this is what Antarctica looked like in 10,000 something BC, before the Younger Dryas brought all this ice. Talking about the Younger Dryas and meltwater pulse 1b, all this fictitious, made-up scientific BS, the same bullshit put out by NASA. None of it's true. None of it. Those maps of Antarctica exist, like the Piri-Reis map and several others. They exist and show the interior of and the exterior of Antarctica, because when those maps were made 600 and 700 years ago, there was no snowpack. Remember what I told you guys? We have suffered through 1,000 years of devastating resets, starting in 522 AD. from 522 AD to 1488. Nothing but reset after reset after reset after reset, depopulations, diseases, no progress, no development. It was terrible. It was terrible. It was so bad, and the gaps in our knowledge on the historical narrative are so deficient that it's got many people thinking that 1,000 years was added to our calendar when it's really 1,000 years of history has been lost. So, Typhon, Phoenix, the Fink, the Neph, the spirit going over the waters that in Genesis that created the evening and the morning was the first day, and then the evening and the morning was the second day. This great Neph, the spirit. In the cosmology of ancient Egypt, the very thing that brought the death of the ancient world also renewed its life. This is what we find in the Genesis. This is what we find in the creation narrative of Genesis as well. So, I'll show you some passages here in a minute. Now, these Phoenix episodes in ancient Egyptian history have been covered up. They've been covered up very, very cleverly. But any astute historian going through the data can see, yeah, the Phoenix did cause this massive destruction. But what do Egyptologists call it? They call it an intermediate period. What is an intermediate period? Oh, it's just 300 years where we don't have any history. Oh, okay. So there was an Egypt here, and then you got this 300-year period for which you've got no papyri, inscriptions, no artwork, stela. You ain't got no stelae. You've got no monuments built. You've got no traditions developed, no anything. It's called an intermediate period to Egyptologists. There's three of them. The first one is the Great Flood. So that intermediate period ends, and we have another intermediate period. It's very curious because these intermediate periods are also punctuated. We have Egyptian hieratic, demotic. We have Egyptian hieroglyphic. We have different writing styles. They are caused by interruptions of infrastructure. Let me give you an example. A real easy example is the fact that in northern Egypt, all this information was preserved. A massive amount of ancient Egyptian beliefs were preserved, but later Egyptians who recorded them didn't quite understand what they were translating. So many of the words were left untranslated. Wallace E. Budge has done an excellent job of showing that the Egyptian Book of the Dead is but a collection of the pyramid texts, the pyramid texts of Unas. Now, there are no texts at the Giza. These are later Egyptian pyramids. The Giza structures, which are pre-flood, antediluvian world, these are constructions of the Sethite dynasty of the 10 kings. They're the ones that built the pyramids. Later Egypt, post-Cataclysm, built their own pyramids. And one of those pyramids was the Pyramid of Unas, where the majority of the pyramid texts are found. These are wall texts called the pyramid texts. But later Egyptians, when they were going through these pyramid texts, they didn't quite understand what these concepts, and they made them simple and cartoonish, but they're actually very advanced, talking about a wonderful structure that was found in the desert that had been like it had been delivered from God. Yeah, it was a holy place. It was the gate to the kingdom of Seeker, which is a gate to the dead in the underworld. But in that kingdom of Seeker, below the desert, was a special place. Well, in that area called the kingdom of Seeker was a special place called the Gate of Rostal. And this is where the souls needed to go to ascend to their star. So interesting that you must go through a structure that leads you underground in order to pass through a gate that is going to catapult your soul to your star. This is ancient Egyptian theology. This is what they believed. So we have this whole period of the pyramid texts in its post-cataclysm. And it's all about the ladder of Set, the ladder of Typhon. Again, we have two concepts merged, just like we have the mansion of the Phoenix, which protects the Benu stone. Right there outside the Great Pyramid. Heliopolis was Cairo, ancient Cairo. So we have the Great Pyramid. We have an Egyptian priesthood that builds the mansion of the Phoenix, which venerates the bird of the celestial bird of the life and death of world cycles, protecting the Benu stone. And yet these concepts are found everywhere in the Egyptian Book of the Dead as well. But it's the ladder of Set, the ladder of Typhon. The ladder is a structure that takes you up. That's what a ladder does. And this is the ladder of Set or Typhon, the Phoenix. Again, the concepts are merged, bridge. These concepts were mirrored later by the Jewish authors of Genesis when it's talking about Jacob's ladder and the angels that were ascending and descending. It's the same concept. Zechariah Sitchin did nail it, calling it the stairway to heaven. It's talking about a pyramid. So this is the reason I mentioned the pyramid text is because the Benu bird reappears and creates a new intermediate period in Egypt. Oh, what's an intermediate period? Oh, it's just a period that, we just don't have any history. There was no development, no new writings. We don't have any. There's a huge interruption in the dynastic list. There's no continuum. Oh, okay. So what happened? Well, I'm going to tell you what happened. It's called the Ogygian Deluge, and every one of our Archaics veterans knows what I'm talking about. Phoenix reappeared in 1687 BC in the month of May and started a 25-year darkness. It literally changed the entire face of our world. It collapsed every single sun-worshiping dynasty. W.J. Perry in Children of the Sun wrote a fantastic book. He just goes with the archaeology and the traditions, and he shows the entire world colonies were being exported from Egypt. Egypt was exporting colonies everywhere, and they all venerated Pharaoh, and they venerated him as the son of the sun. He was the link between heaven and earth, was through the house of Pharaoh. All these colonies that became other countries and nations had this Heliolithic maritime empire shipping guilds that kept communication, kept building materials back and forth, populations of people moving from the Urumbaba Valley in South America, Tiwanaku, Ollantaytambo, whatever the hell you say. You guys know I'm never going to pronounce this, Cuzco. And then from South America, they go to Raku, Easter Island. They would go over all the way to Southeast Asia, across Melanesia, Polynesia, Micronesia. They go to all these different places. And then they would continue on to Chinese Yangtze Valley and then travel overland on this massive elevated road of megaliths. You know of it as the Great Wall of China. It was never Chinese and it was never a wall. It is a thoroughfare. This whole massive wharfs and shipping. Max Egan did a great job after he listened to Martin and I explain to him, hey man, look, man, the Great Wall of China is not a wall, man. It is a road. It is a conveyance. It is the largest Amazon shipping guild that's ever existed. That's what they did. It literally covered a good fourth of the world where they're able to export all kinds of things. So and it was all by backpack. Yeah, you got a whole bunch of locals just carrying from tower to tower. Every tower is a Roman mile. Yeah. So anyway, we have these pyramid texts explaining all these advanced concepts, but they're not really understood later, and they couldn't be understood. Why? Because the Ogygian Deluge. What happens after the Ogygian Deluge? No more pyramid texts. Now in Egypt, we have the coffin texts, the vases and ossuaries. Now the Egyptians decided after the death of the world, the death of the sun can no longer be trusted. They had put all their faith into the sun, and now the sun died for 25 years. a miniature vapor canopy, volcanism, whatever it was. This canopy was created. It is mentioned even in the ancient Americas. I've cited this on my channel and in my published books. The same 25-year darkness that afflicted the Mediterranean, Egyptian, Near Eastern world, probably the whole hemisphere, also afflicted the Americas. It's in an ancient American Mexican Toltec codex. So now the Egyptians begin to wake up. The second intermediate period is over around 620. No, excuse me, 640, 650. Yeah, 25-year darkness. So it's amazing how many anthropologists and archaeologists agree that every country in the world, every culture in the world began to wake up 25 years after 1687 BC. And at the same time, archaeologists and historians have published a plethora of studies and books showing that around 1700 BC, a scientific approximate that's only 13 years off of the exact Phoenix year of 1687 BC. But the Avellino eruption in Italy literally blanketed 1/3 of the sky. Just one volcano. It's called the Avellino eruption. It's in Italy. You know of it. You know of it as Vesuvius. Now, Vesuvius buried in 1687 BC, whole cities were buried, just like in 79 AD, Vesuvius erupted and buried again Pompeii and Herculaneum. And the Roman occupants of the pleasure cities of Herculaneum and Pompeii didn't even have a clue that 60 feet underneath them was a whole nother infrastructure that had been buried alive. They didn't even know. So, Egypt's history and archaeology shows us the Phoenix resets in perfect clarity. Their faith was unfolding during their longevity. And now the Ogygian Deluge destroys the world, collapses all the dynasties, completely ends the Heliolithic maritime empire, completely ends all the sons of the sun dynasty, all the children of the sun dynasties. It's over with. Pharaoh no longer regards the sun as a deity. 1687 BC, 25-year darkness begins, and the Egyptians abandon the pyramid text. When they start writing again, it's more primitive, and it's called the coffin texts. Now, the new medium is all over crypts, crypt walls, and coffins. Why? Because the whole world died. That's why. Now they've developed this obsession with mummification and preserving the dead and preserving their organs in different pies. Now this new cult of death has taken over ancient Egypt. This is the Ogygian. This is the whole Ogygian mess is what it started. But the Ogygian Deluge also introduced something else to the other Mediterranean occupants. Minoan Linear A was born. Now Minoan Linear A is born, and they're writing text in Linear A. But we got to introduce the next cataclysm, because the next cataclysm, again, 552 years, epic, massive, world-ending reset. 2239 BC was the Great Flood of Deucalion. It's known as the Typhon flood, or the flood of Noah. 2239 BC, it ended the 1656 years of the pre-flood world, which began in 3895 BC. Now, none of this is my dating, guys. I have showed in my chronicon all the sources from ancient texts to modern chronologists that all date these things. I don't have to date anything. 2239 BC is the Great Flood. And one Phoenix cycle later is 552 years. Creates the Ogygian Deluge. The flood of Ogyges. There's more historical records in existence concerning the flood of Ogyges than any other disaster in human history. It's amazing. But 552 years after 1687 BC, when the Phoenix appeared in the sky and obliterated everything, I'm not going into details on these. I've already got whole videos about the flood, what happened, about what was seen in the Ogygian Deluge, what happened. And now, 1135 BC, when the phoenix reappears and starts the great Mediterranean Dark Age. Atlantis is destroyed. The sea peoples are never enter the historical record again because their civilization drowned. Remember, the Sea People's invasions was 1239 to 1229 BC, and it's recorded by the Egyptians, 2 waves of invasions. More Sea People showed up as the Philistines, the Phoenicians, a whole slew of them came in and took over the Hittite Empire, collapsed the whole Hittite empire. Homer's Iliad was all about the Danaan and the Trojan War, Trojan Horse, the battles for Troy, and Hesiod in his Theogony even mentions that a whole new age of heroes had suddenly appeared, and it was tucked in between. You had the gold, silver, brass, and iron age. And it was really weird how in the Bronze Age, in the middle of the Bronze Age, he had tucked an age of heroes in there. Many commentators have thought this very odd, but I don't, because 1687 BC would have been a 25-year darkness, which would have again produced giantism, because that's what vapor canopies do. That's what ambient radiation from volcanoes do. It makes insects, animals, amphibians, reptiles, marsupials, and mammals, and humans to grow to extraordinary sizes. Anything exposed to the ambient radiation grows and becomes more healthy. So this is what our historical record and our traditional record convey. And this is what the archaeology proves. This is not the history of the world that you've been taught. This is the history of the world they're covering up. Ice Age is bullshit. Vapor canopy ecology is the only thing that makes sense of all the anomalies that have been documented in the Archaics research. Flash frozen whole ecospheres, everything. Massive amount of data here in Archaics, and none of it can be explained. We have to compartmentalize our mysteries like other people do. We have to practice exclusions and identify particulars such as, oh yes, this is a mystery. Let's wrap it all up in a nice little package and let's put it on the shelf right here, because we got a different mystery over here we need to. I'm not like that and never will be. Every single piece of data, everything that we uncover in Archaics must fit somewhere. It has to, or it's not true, or it is true and the model that it's trying to be fit into is inaccurate. That's my position. This is why I know vapor canopy is exactly the missing link. Remember, when the flood happened, the very first thing that happened, as soon as the great flood was over, what happened? All of a sudden, everybody starts sun calendars. We got a 4 sun age system. All of a sudden, these yuga systems all pop up, and everybody's venerating the sun. That's what happened. This is the Egyptian version. The sun just appeared. A whole new god appeared. But we have the same story told in Sumer as well. We'll get to that in a second. So coming out of Egypt are the Gnostics, the ancient Copts of Egypt. You know, they give rise to the Egyptian Gnosis, the Egyptian Gnostics. And in an old Gnostic text, we have, you know, these came from oral traditions in Egypt, but we have a text called On the Origin of the World. And in that text from the Nag Hammadi Library, it specifically states that Phoenix was created to be a witness against the powers of darkness, against the angels that rebelled. What? Phoenix is the bringer of darkness, and yet it is a witness against the darkness. So Phoenix is said in this Gnostic text to have been created as a witness against the angels, but also to endure all the way to the end of the world. the consummation. Therefore, such a statement requires that Phoenix is a participant in the end of the world. And we know this. My Archaics veterans do. You already know. In May of 2040, Phoenix is the sixth seal of the apocalypse. But even more so, 138 years after that, Phoenix appears in the year 2178. And you already know what happens in that year. It's the only number in existence that just loops back. It will not collapse to zero. That's a whole different rabbit hole. My vets know what I'm talking about. Everybody else thinks I'm crazy. That's fine. I'm cool with that. So it is interesting that in ancient times, Greek writers who were writing about Egyptian antiquities, they even said that the phoenix, according to the Egyptians, the phoenix visited our world between 500 and 540 years. That's real specific. But we're looking at knowledge through resets. Yeah, 1135 BC was terrible. The world, the great Mediterranean Dark Age, 300 years of no development, no writing, no schooling, no learning. Imagine everything that was lost. After that 300 years, the Egyptians were no longer writing on coffin texts. They started writing on coffin texts when the whole world was killed because of the Ogygian Deluge. But prior to the Ogygian Deluge, everything was written on pyramid texts. Prior to the pyramid texts, we don't know where the Egyptians got their information, because by the time the first hieroglyphs were all put down, their cosmology, their understanding of the world that we were in was already very advanced. So we have ancient correspondences here. We cannot omit the fact that Zechariah Sitchin did produce something very interesting. And it is the fact that he found an Akkadian document that describes the 360-degree sphere or circle of the heavens. Now, he says that among the stars, according to this tablet, among the stars is the Apin, a Sumerian word, A-P-I-N. This is Zechariah Sitchin now. And the Apin brings vapor clouds. Not making any of this up, guys. Not making any of this up. Zechariah Sitchin in the Earth Chronicles series says that according to this Akkadian tablet, which has a Sumerian word, there is an object among the stars called the Apin. And when it appears, it brings vapor clouds. Yeah. Told you we're going to go deep. I told you, veterans, you're going to hear some new stuff in this presentation. I pulled all this out of my Archaics Academy notes as I've been putting things together. So Apin is no different than the Egyptian pin deity. It's no different. Apin and pin deity are the same thing. One is Egyptian, one is Sumerian. The Greek is Phoenix. So it's we have a unique confirmation of the pin deity associated to the Phoenix from the ancient Sumerian astronomical tablets. This came out of a very unique text. I just couldn't believe when I found it. This is not Zechariah Sitchin. This is a Near Eastern translation. It specifically says, when Apin reaches the path of the sun, there will be a famine of cattle. There will be want. When an object and Apin stand facing one another, there will be an invasion of an enemy. Now, it says here that translators are confused, some thinking that Apin is a reference to the planet Mars, but in the same text, Mars is affirmatively identified by the Sumerian Lula. The explanatory notes, get this, the explanatory notes in Akkadian reveal that the Apin appears 3 times, and scholars are confused, thinking it was referring to Mars, but the only association is that Mars is a red planet. There are translators' notes in Akkadian on the tablet. So the translator was trying to convey that the Apon isn't what you think it is. It does not want you to interpret this as the planet Mars. That's amazing. So, talking about the Apon, and we find out on this tablet that the Apon is red. Remember, my Archaics veterans, every time the Phoenix appears, what appears first? A new star. What color is that star? That star is red. So, Zecharia Sitchin, he's got a real penchant for claiming that everything is Nibiru. Zecharia Sitchin claims that Nibiru at the flood was called, get this, Shul Pakuni. It's Shul period Pa period Kun period E, which is close to the earliest, get this is in Zecharia Sitchin's notes, which is close to the earliest title in Egypt for Phoenix. What? We have Zecharia Sitchin right here finding a word in Sumerian, Shul Pakuni. You can see Phoenix in it, Pakun, right there. But Zecharia Sitchin admitting that this was a reference to Phoenix. But he's also claiming that it's talking about Nibiru. To Zecharia Sitchin, Phoenix wasn't an object. He knew nothing about Phoenix. He never published anything about Phoenix. References to Phoenix would have been Nibiru to him, which to me I totally disagree with. However, proof that Shul Pakuni is Phoenix is that in the Akkadian tablet, it specifically says that Shul Pakuni frightens the sun. Nibiru has never darkened the sun. I have no historical documents, period. And you guys know I call Nibiru the Nemesis X object. I have a lot of material on the Nemesis X object, but the Nemesis X object has never darkened the sun. Yeah. Crazy. Shul Pakunu right here. Zecharia Sitchin found a Sumerian reference to the Phoenix. And what the Phoenix does, it darkens the sun. It is also red as the Apon. The Apon is nothing but the Sumerian version of Pin deity, Pin god of ancient Egypt. Now, why are these important? Because we have scholars from 100 years ago that have never been refuted. Their research has never been overturned. Professor L.A. Waddell wrote a book about Egyptian civilization, its Sumerian origin. That's why it's important. L.A. Waddell shows that the first 5 dynasties of Egypt mirror the first 5 dynasties of Sumer. They're one and the same. He matches the names, he matches the geography, he does all that. Then he goes to show that Egyptian civilization and Sumerian civilization come from the same parent source. He's not saying one came from the other. They came from the same parent source. So to find that they had very close approximations for the word Phoenix doesn't surprise me at all. Now, another Sumerologist I like, somebody Billy Carson may need to read, is Samuel Noah Kramer. He's a real Sumerologist, a real translator. He translated a Sumerian flood tradition. In that flood tradition, it specifically says that Utu, the sun god, came from shedding light on heaven and earth only after the great flood swept over the land. Let me explain that to you one more time. We have a verifiable Sumerologist who translated Sumerian cuneiform and is telling us that a text says that the Sumerian god Utu, the very last god to appear in the Sumerian pantheon, which was already ancient, and goes back to pre-flood times. Remember, the Sumerians and Chinese are the only cultures that literally left us records that they survived the Great Flood, and they had dynasties on both sides of the flood. Here we have a Sumerian tablet telling us that the very last god to enter the Sumerian pantheon we know is Utu, and Utu appeared only after a great flood. So Utu is not ancient like An, Enlil, Ninhursag, Damkina, Enki, the older Sumerian gods and goddesses. No, they're all recognizable. Utu came after the Cataclysm. So the importance of this cannot be overstated. We have here exactly what the ancient Egyptian Heliopolitan cult of the Mansion of the Phoenix told us as well. Horus, the sun god, appeared last because a cataclysm happened. What was the cataclysm? He defeated Typhon. Typhon flood was the flood of Noah. Everything makes sense in the ancient Egyptian version of events. What doesn't make sense are Egyptologists trying to tell us what these things mean, as opposed to us putting it together by looking at all the variables. Yeah, if you want to learn about Egypt, you've got to ignore Egyptian sources. They're toxic. They're going to tell you all the wrong shit, compartmentalize all the data to where you don't even give a damn. You're not even interested in learning it anymore because nothing fits together. It's the same thing our collegiate institutions do today. Compartmentalize knowledge to the point where an anthropologist today can't even keep up with paleobotany. A paleobotanist can't even keep up with archaeoastronomy. An archaeoastronomer can't even keep up with just basic biology. An astronomer can't even keep up with anybody in the field of geology. It's impossible. Knowledge has become so compartmentalized, nobody can figure anything out anymore. So this is the value of Archaics as well. We remove all those barriers, every bit, and we analyze everything, chew it all up and spit out the bones. So we have the Sumerian version mirroring the Egyptian version, and that is the sun in the sky did not appear until after the Great Flood, which makes sense of the anthropology. What does the anthropology say? That all these civilizations started their sun calendars. What was the ancient Toltec? What was the first of 4 sun ages? Each one collapsed by Phoenix. I've shown this. But the first of 4 sun ages was when? When the water sun appeared. Why was it called a water sun? Because the Great Flood was the collapse of smoking mirror. The sky, the hammered bracelet. In Genesis, the firmament above, the waters above. It fell. That's what caused the Great Flood. In the temperate equatorial areas, it fell as condensation and rain. It didn't flood the whole world. It flash flooded. It would have been bad, but many people survived. But closer to the northern and southern extremities, it fell as snow, and it fell, and it probably blanketing went 2 miles high very rapidly, because it can't do that today because it only snows a ½ inch a year in the north, in the Arctic, and then the Antarctic. And most people don't even know that, but it's a scientific fact. That's why Ice Age is such a mystery. How did it get there? So they had to invent how it got there instead of going with the evidence. All the punctuated appearances of whole life forms as if they had no history. All these massive resets that completely wiped out life, and then suddenly all life is back. Remember, I have a very compelling video showing hundreds of fossils that supposedly lived millions of years ago, and yet every one of those life forms is in your backyard today. But how? I'm showing fossils of them being flash frozen And if creatures were flash frozen at the bottom of the oceans, like the jellyfish that I show, and the sharks and the fish eating each other, and fish giving birth and all that, and then all these animals on the surface that are fighting each other and totally entombed in the very daily activities they're doing. If everything flash froze from the tallest mountains to the deepest oceans, nothing could have survived. And if nothing could have survived, how are those same monarch butterflies in fossil form? Those same centipedes, caterpillars, earthworms, flies, fruit flies, cockroaches, all these amphibians, geckos, frogs, toads, all these things that I showed in that video. How, if the whole world flash froze, how are those damned creatures in my backyard today? None of it makes sense according to the scientific BS we've been given. But the Phoenix phenomenon makes every bit of it make sense, because we're in a controlled environment, and the Phoenix is a reset protocol. Life forms come and go just like that, as I've shown in many of my presentations. So we have the sun creating the sun calendars, the sun ages, these massive yugas. After this cataclysm completely ends the pre-flood world, which was technologically advanced. We have, before the flood, we have Utnapishtim. First of all, his name is Atrahasis. Before the flood, he's the flood hero. But after the flood, he grows old and he gets a new name. His new name is Utnapishtim. It is Utu Napishtim, which Napishtim is just, it's the reverse of an Indo-Iranian pronoun, Zisudra, but it's Noah. It's Noah. And in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, the hero Gilgamesh, after the flood, goes to visit Utnapishtim, the far away. His name is Utu Napishtim, in reference to the new sun. That's who he is. Utnapishtim, the far away. And Gilgamesh goes and talks to him. And lo and behold, what do we find? He's the survivor. What was he told? He was told by the gods before the flood to go to the city of Sippar and secure it and bury the books, bury all the knowledges that had been passed down from all the forefathers before the flood, and secure it. And he was literally, and this story conveys to us that this city has a feature about it that it would never be lost. Napishtim is told that the great flood is going to destroy the whole world. It's going to destroy everything. But he's told to go bury books in the city of Sippar. Sippar means books. But he's told this, to go bury the books in the city of Sippar. And then after the flood, go retrieve the library hidden at Sippar. How do you do that when the whole topography of the world's changed? How do you do that when you don't have any more geographical markers? How? I'm going to tell you how. Because the ancient Egyptians preserved the story in the naming of the district of the Great Pyramid Complex as Saqqara. And later it was Saqqara, and then Saqqaru. And that's what we have there today, the pyramids of Saqqara. That's how you preserve knowledge. You put it in a structure that is specifically designed to survive a flood. This is what the Egyptian Copts told us in the traditions of Surid. I've published these on my channel and in my published book, Lost Scriptures of Giza. In that text, you will find, in the text of Surid, you will find that the ancient Egyptians believed that the Great Pyramid Complex was literally built to survive a flood. And that the architect, Surid, was a ruler over 130 nomes of Egypt. That's what we hear about in the book of Jasher, because in the book of Jasher, we find out that at Akuzan, sounds a lot like Giza, but at Akuzan, Enoch ascended into heaven. He left the world and ascended into the sky. He did that at Akuzan. But Akuzan was supposed to be at the middle of the earth. Same thing said about the Great Pyramid. It's at the middle of the earth. Now, when Enoch vanished, he was the king. He was the emperor over 130 kings and princes. The same thing said about Surid of Asar. And Surid, what is that? It just means the south. Surid just means the south. or it might have a deeper meaning, like Flavius Josephus suggests, when he says that 2 pillars were built in the land of Syriad to survive the flood, and they were built by the genius of the Sethites before the flood, the children of Seth. The Egyptians called them the children of Set. Why were they called the children of Set? Because these people possessed the knowledge of the mansion of the phoenix. They possessed the knowledge of the phoenix. What am I talking about? I am talking about a people who can predict every time the phoenix comes because they knew the phoenix history. They understood it. They built the Great Pyramid, and this is why the Great Pyramid, its rectilinear measurements are all, I've showed this multiple times. I'm going to show you a chart here in a little while, but I've showed this multiple times. The Great Pyramid's measurements are divisible by 138 everywhere. The pre-flood world, 1656 years, is encoded in the pyramid. The year 3895 BC is encoded perfectly in the pyramid. It's all there. Those of you who have seen my Great Pyramid playlist, you'll already know. Those measurements are Sir Flinders Petrie, and they were done with precision micrometers. They are scientifically accepted measurements today. They're the only measurements that are accepted by Egyptologists today, the only measurements that I use, and they are divisible by 138 everywhere. Why? Because the architects knew all about the 138-year periodicity of the Phoenix phenomenon. They knew all about it. They built the structure. When you put all these variables together, the whole story just falls right there in your lap. The land of Syriad of Josephus is the land of the Sirius worshippers. The land of the Sirius worshippers is Egypt, because it's the Egyptians who venerated the dog star. Remember, the Sphinx was never a human face. That's a little bitty neck with a human face and a headdress. But even the width of the headdress is still the exact width of the original neck of Anubis. I've got a whole video showing the geometry of that statue. The body is gigantic compared to this little bitty pinhead. And the reason it's a pinhead is because the whole head was carved out of the neck. The original head was wiped out in the Typhon flood. But the Egyptians had a giant guardian dog. And this is precisely what the ancient Aztecs recorded. And I've showed that on my channel as well. The ancient Aztecs believed that there was an ancestral place, like a Garden of Eden with 2 mountains. And they believed that there were 9 rivers that came off of this, but they couldn't go back. It was the land of their nativity, but they couldn't go back because now it was guarded by a giant dog. But that giant dog was friendly to the dead and would guide the spirits of the dead, into the complex. What? Where do the Egyptians get that information? That's the same thing the ancient Greeks said about Cerberus, the 3-headed dog, demon dog, one head of a dog and a head of 2 other things, but it guarded the realm of the dead. And if you went to the river Styx in the realm of the dead, Cerberus was kind to the dead, but the living could not pass. So there's a whole lot. When you put all these things together, they fit so perfectly. When you cite all these different sources and see, but they're all commiserate. So we have a Napishtim. Napishtim was able after the flood to go to Egypt. And we have that story preserved as well. In my published books and on my videos, I tell you guys the story. It's right there for everybody. The ancient Egyptians were amazed. They went into this structure and they said it was built by Thoth, and they found a chamber and they called it the chamber of the plans with numbers, but they couldn't decipher any of it. And they knew it was Thoth, the messenger of the gods. But a venerable man from the land of the Philistines visited them. He was 110 years old. This is an Egyptian papyrus. A 110-year-old man from the land of the Philistines came, and he understood and taught them what it said. This gave rise to the writings of the Ladder of Set in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. But when we put these things together, we find out real quick, says, wow. Book of Genesis says that Abram was 110 years old when he went to Egypt. Remember, Abram is Brahma. His consort was Saraswati. In Genesis, she appears as Sarai and then Sarah. It's the same story. Why did they say he came from the land of the Philistines? It's because he was living in Gerar at the time, which is a Philistine city. It's in Genesis in black and white, where Abraham was living. He even had an argument over a well against the king of the Philistines, Abimelech. It's all recorded right there in Genesis. So it's deeper than that. You have to go for more historical analysis on that. It's amazing, but that's in my Lost Scriptures of Giza. So, we need to move on. So we don't have these resets caused by the Phoenix. Archaeology, it's not just Egypt where this happened, because after 1130, but after another reset occurred, we had a complete cessation of literacy. Totally collapsed. By the time literacy returned, it wasn't like it was before. It had changed in the Mediterranean. I'm not talking about Egypt. Egypt went from the pyramid text to the coffin text and ossuaries, and then with intermediate periods between them. Then from the coffin text, they went into their hieratic, their demotic, their hieroglyphic, all this. But you know what? The Mediterranean had linear A, but after a Phoenix reset, linear B, Minoan linear B develops. And out of Minoan linear B developed, we have this Phoenician alphabet developing, taking on different forms until it was basically solidified in the days of Cecrops of Athens. So archaeology, it's literally telling us from a different vantage point exactly what we already know from the Phoenix phenomenon. Now, Phoenix creates whole topographical changes, earthquakes, all kinds of tsunamis. I've documented upheaval. I'm not going into a lot of the details on Phoenix. I have a whole playlist for that. I got 3 published books about that. I've already got 60-something videos on Phoenix. That's not what this is about. This is a summary of concepts about the Phoenix. This is why my Archaics veterans are learning something new in this video. I'm not rehashing a bunch of the old stuff. We're looking at this from a different perspective. In ancient China, which has Sumerian and Egyptian overlaps with its first 5 dynasties, the earliest Egyptian, before the logographs, when it was Sumerian pictographs, they looked like Egyptian pictographs, which looked just like Chinese sigils. Yeah, when you see the comparative charts, it's amazing. It's like all came from a parent source. The overlaps are amazing. So we have this commiseration. But in ancient China, Phoenix was called the Feng. Sometimes it was called Feng Shui or Feng Shu. But there's a deeper connection here. Feng was a phoenix, a red celestial dragon in the sky. But as Feng Shu or Feng Shui, it was also responsible for changing the landscape. The Chinese practice of Feng Shui, of literally creating terraces, of terraforming all the available space that they have, of taking whole outcrops on cliffs and carving them into features. The art of landscaping called Feng Shui in China has its origin in the Phoenix, changing the landscape every time it appears. So the importance of the Phoenix, remember Phoenix Hill, in my videos, I talk about Phoenix Hill, how anomalous it is. Megalithic complex. Most people have never heard of it, but it's a place called Feng Hill in Chinese. It's Phoenix Hill, and it's a subterranean complex in China. But the Phoenix was so important to the ancient Chinese. The Phoenix was a dragon, and it was connected to timekeeping in Chinese, literally connected to repetitive disasters. So important that in the Chinese zodiac, which is nothing like the Greek zodiac, in the Chinese zodiac, it doesn't have concepts. In the Chinese zodiac, it has the monkey, the cock, the sheep. It has a serpent, it has a horse, it has a rabbit, a tiger, a rat, an ox, a pig, a dog, and a dragon called the Feng. The Chinese zodiac has all absolutely normal concepts that are known to the Chinese, mundane concepts, with one representing the dragon, the Feng. To the Chinese, it was very important, but it was connected to timekeeping, the Feng, and connected to Feng Shui, changing the landscape. So these crossovers, this ancient Egypt, I've already referenced it one time, but we need to go a little deeper into the fact that the Gnostics, which came out of Egypt, Egyptian Orthodox, religionists, these Gnostics, they were referred to. Think about this. The students of the Gnosis that possess the information about the Phoenix and what the Phoenix was for, and that the Phoenix is a part of prophecy and it's coming back in the last days. The Phoenix was keeper of the times. The Phoenix was a witness against the archons to keep the archons in check. The Phoenix is specifically designed as bringer of darkness. Who preserved all that? The Egyptian Gnostics did. Do you want to know what the Egyptian Gnostics were called by the other Egyptian priesthoods? They were called the sons of Typhon, just like the Heliopolitan priest 1,000 years earlier called the Sethites. They called them the children of Set because they were possessors of this amazing information, the secret information nobody else had on the exact periodicity of the Phoenix phenomenon. Why would that have been a protected state secret? I'm going to tell you why. Let me go to it real quick. I'm going to skip over some notes. I'll go back to them. I don't really need them, but this is important because Phoenix was predicted. Remember, in the Sumerian and Akkadian epics concerning the flood was a foreknown event. They knew exactly when it was happening. In Genesis, Noah was told precisely 120 years before the flood. Yeah, in the book of Jasher, the exact date of the flood was known to the point where Noah literally waited 115 years before he started building the ark, knowing that the ark was a 5-year project. The reason this is important is because the great flood, the Typhon flood, was predicted with exactitude. They staked their lives on it. They built their fleets of arks. They built underground facilities, did all kinds of things to prepare for it. And this is what they did. So it was foreknown, it's predicted. In order to be predicted, that means you already had to have a historical body of knowledge available to you by which you could extrapolate the next time the Phoenix would be here. This implies, remember the Archaics chronology goes back to 5239 BC. 5239 BC is 1,344 years before Phoenix created a new heavens and new earth, total systemic reset called the Adam and Eve reset of Genesis chapter 1 and 2 in 3895 BC. 1,344 years before that is when the Archaics chronology begins. But 414 years, 138 times 3, is the very first documented period of the appearance of Phoenix, 4309 BC. So they did have, it was 2,070 years of history. They knew exactly when it was gonna come. They knew. They knew because of 3895 BC. Maybe some other episodes we don't know about in the historical record. We haven't been able to find it, but we did find 2647 BC. 2647 BC is 414 years before the Great Flood. So we know about that episode thanks to Zechariah Sitchin. So anyway, let me move on. Noah, the Great Flood was predicted. Now, according to the book of Jasher and some Talmudic writings, Jacob knew that the sun was going to darken he didn't know about the phoenix. He didn't call it the phoenix, but in the book of Jasher, Jacob and his sons are surrounded by 7 Canaanite armies. And there's only, excuse me, always sneeze twice. All right. Excuse me. But in the book of Jasher, they're surrounded by 7 Canaanite armies. These Canaanite armies attack them, but Jacob holds off, tells his sons to wait, and then next thing you know, the sun darkens, and then an earthquake shakes the very foundations of the world as rocks fall from the sky, and the sky goes black, and the Canaanites are terrified. And because they're scared and running, the Israelites are allowed to chase them and hack them and defeat them. So this is a predicted event. This is the use of scientific information to perform a military act. That's what's being conveyed, and it's not the first time. So in 1273 BC, on a phoenix year, on the 138-year periodicity, the throne of Argos is now up for, I forgot what happened to the father, but the 2 sons were, the 2 sons were Atreus and his brother. I can't remember his brother's name, but his brother was a military hero. Atreus was a mathematician and astronomer. And they came up for the throne. They argued over the throne. And then Atreus said, you know what? He told them that the sun was going to darken. And that if the sun didn't darken on the day that he said it would, then he would relinquish his right to the throne to his brother. His brother accepted the terms, said, hell yeah. But Atreus was an astronomer and a mathematician. And Atreus predicted when the sun was going to darken. And in 1273 BC, he was right, which is confirmed in the Hittite writings of King Merciless II. Said that the sun darkened. Amaziduga the first, his writings claim that something obscured the sun. It's very, very unusual, but this means Atreus had access to information that allowed him to extrapolate when the next time the phoenix was going to darken the sun. This wasn't an eclipse. Now, again, we have the same thing happening here. We have 1135 BC, the second battle of Moytura, the fleets of the Tuatha Danann trying to take ancient Ireland. They have lost the first battle of Moytura. Moytura was the field of towers. Some of you know what I'm talking about. The round towers of Ireland. The ancient round towers of Ireland are the same ones as the ancient round towers of Sardinia. Archaeological anomalies. They had a purpose, an engineering purpose. It wasn't for people to go in. People couldn't go in these towers. They did something else. So anyway, these are masterwork towers. But in the second battle of Moytura, the Tuatha Danann were fighting against the indigenous Firbolgs. They were giants. They're described as giants of ancient Ireland. So the leaders of the Tuatha Danann withheld their assault in the second battle of Moytura until the sun darkened. And when the sun darkened, the sky went black. There's an earthquake, and then all of a sudden, the Tuatha Danann unleashed, and they totally invade Ireland, and they defeated the Firbolgs, who were terrified. Again, scientific information is being used for a military operation. This shows that the event was predictable, meaning there was a body of literature available at that time. 1135 BC was also sinking of Atlantis. The last time sea peoples are ever mentioned in Egyptian records again. But Sea Peoples Federation. So that's not these aren't isolated incidents. What about 583 BC? Well, actually 585 BC. This is amazing. 585 BC. Herodotus of Halicarnassus relates to us and tells us that one of the reasons why Thales of Miletus became one of the 7 wise men of Greece is because in 585 BC, he predicted that the sun was going to darken. His prediction was 2 years in advance. When the event occurred, it was widely recognized because when the sun darkened, the Medes and the Lydians, their 2 armies, were trying to conclude 5 years of continual warfare. They met on the field of battle, but the sun darkened in the month of May, stopped the battle. King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon was there as a witness to the truce, the peace agreement that was made, and a monument was erected in Asia Minor, and it still stands there today. That monument is at Yassilakia, and it shows a king, a Lydian king, and a Median king grasping their hands together, and their hands are covered by a black disc. That is the sun darkening. So the event happened in 583 BC. So it's predictable. Thales of Miletus, according to Herodotus of Halicarnassus, in his book, The Histories, written about 430 BC, he specifically said that Thales was a Phoenician by remote descent. Well, being a Phoenician, that makes him a son of Typhon. That makes him one of the children of Set. So let's see. Also, we have to mention Nostradamus. If we're going to be talking about predicting Phoenix deals, we got to mention Nostradamus. Many of you know that in 1994, members of the Italian National Library in Rome, they had discovered a Nostradamus text that had never been known before. Well, it had been, but it had been forgotten. And they're going through all these old books because it's easy to lose text, guys. I lose text. I just learned the other day for safekeeping and to protect them, I removed all my books from the 1700s and all my books from the 1800s that go up to the Civil War. And I removed them. You don't see none of them here. These are all after the Civil War, 1800s. So I removed those for safekeeping. And as I was doing, I did a video the other day, show and tell. And in that video, I couldn't believe I found 2 books in there that I need that data that's in those books. Couldn't even believe I had that in my library. It's amazing. Books that were showing original AM dating, Anno Mundi dating. I've been telling you guys that almost all the books were using that a long time ago, and then switched over to AD. But yeah, that's amazing. Anyway, this text was researched by Ottavio Cesare Ramati. He's a Italian scholar, and he went through this Nostradamus book that was unknown. Nobody knew Nostradamus had written another book. And his own book is published called Nostradamus, The Lost Prophecies. No, The Lost Manuscript. And in that text, Nostradamus specifically references the year 1903. Cesare Ramati doesn't know why. We know why. Archaics veterans know why. But Nostradamus mentions 1903. And concerning 1903, he says, many will die before the phoenix dies. Until 670, his dwelling shall endure. Now, on the surface, he's mentioning Phoenix. He's mentioning Phoenix in reference to 1903, which is amazing. But he's also saying that many will die before the Phoenix dies. And then he provides the number 670. So, remember, in the Sumerian king list, we are told that the 7 kings, which are the subject of the book of Revelation and prophecy, the 7 kings ruled in the pre-flood period for 241,200 shars. Very specific number. Now, people like Billy Carson and others are going to tell you it's 241,200 years. Absolutely ridiculous. But under the draconian count system, before the sun could be seen in the sky, they counted turnings of the stars. That's what Shar is. It's a unit of measurement. It's a turning of the stars around Alpha Draconis. Genesis preserves it as the evening and the morning was the first day. The evening and the morning is the second day. The first timekeeping system provided in the book of Genesis is a day count system. This is why so many ancient records are so convoluted, because after intermediate periods of vast centuries, after resets, people translating older texts don't understand these calendrical techniques. That's why. So we have a code here because of the genius of Nostradamus, who was also a chronologist. Nostradamus, mentioning 1903 in reference to the Phoenix, also mentions that the number 670. We know the 241,200 shars of the 7 kings of the Sumerian king list, divided by the 360-degree sphere, circle, cycle of the Sumerians. Yeah, guys, the Sumerians divided the circle into 360 degrees. They also divided the year into 360 days. This was all Sumerian. And when you use the Sumerian sexagesimal system, 241,200 shars becomes 670 years exactly. 670 years. What happened in the 670th year? Exactly what Nostradamus is saying. Many will die before the Phoenix dies. The great flood collapsed the vapor canopy. It gave birth to the sun. The great flood of Noah, the Typhon flood, the day the sky fell, was in the 670th year. It ended the reign of the 7 kings that return in the future, which he's now referencing. He doesn't just mention 1903, which is overlapping. 1903 overlaps into the Phoenix year, guys. Remember, Phoenix year begins in May, mid-May of 1902 to mid-May of 1903 is the Phoenix year. Nostradamus nailed it. Not only that, but he mentions Phoenix. Not only that, he mentions 670 years, which ended the pre-flood world, which was ended by the Phoenix. But the fourth clue that shows you the genius of Nostradamus is found when we look at the number 670 in a totally different dimension of arithmetic. The number 670 divided by 5, the golden proportion, 1.618, is exactly 414.0. A cursed earth period, 414. Archaics veterans already know what that is. It's 138, the Phoenix number, times 3. So, yes, this is the genius. This is the genius of Nostradamus. But Nostradamus knew the Phoenix numbers. How do we know that? Because in Nostradamus's letter to King Henry of France, he specifically says that there were 1,242 years between Adam and Noah. What? 1,242 years between Adam and Noah. He's absolutely correct. But there's an overlap. Adam wasn't dead yet, and Noah wasn't old. But there is 1,242 years between them. But why would he say such a number? You already know why. It's 414 times 3, or 138 times 9, something like that. So it's a Phoenix number. Why would Nostradamus convey a Phoenix number to King Henry of France? He did, though. He did. So it's just so interesting because Stephen Jones, in his book, The Secrets of Time, Stephen Jones has never reached out and talked to me. I have plugged his book hundreds of times in my own published books and on my channel. He probably doesn't like my guts because, I'm a maverick, and my belief system is probably very different than his. But I still value his chronological material. His book is fantastic. Now, I don't agree with all his conclusions. I'm not a Christian in that sense, but he did find that reviewing the historical record, there are many, many, many events in the historical record that are all relative to each other that are 414 years apart. How did he come up with that number? How did Stephen Jones not see the relevance of the number 138? He never saw it. He didn't know anything about the Phoenix, and yet he still nailed the fact that so many historical events occurred in multiples of 414 years. That's amazing. His book is called The Secrets of Time. It's crazy. But even the Egyptians knew the number 138. How do we know this? Because I have cited in my published books that the Egyptians venerated a 1,656 month period. Remember, the Egyptians didn't care about years. This is my problem with all the people trying to say Atlantis was the Younger Dryas shit. No, all the ancient chronographers will tell you the Egyptians counted moons. It changes everything. And the Egyptians told us that there was a very important cycle that's 1,656 moons in length. That's real easy, guys. That's 138 years. That you can't make this stuff up. But we have an old Jewish tradition. Remember, the Jews spent a lot of time in Egypt. The largest Jewish population in the entire world was not in Israel. It was not in Palestine. It was outside of Alexandria, Egypt. It was in the Goshen area, the Nine Bows area. Huge. During the Roman era, more Jews lived in Egypt than anywhere else in the world. They were the administrators, tax assessors, all that stuff. So we have an old Jewish tradition that two angels were kicked out of heaven simply because they warned Lot about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The interesting thing is that this Jewish tradition says that the angels, remember, Phoenix is a witness against the angels. The angels were kicked out of heaven for 138 years. Why would you make up such an arbitrary number? Why? So this we know that the book of Genesis, the pre-flood world, was 1,656 years, and we know that's divisible by 138. It's the antediluvian world. The Phoenix number is right there for everybody to see in the book of Genesis. And it's long been known. It has been published in hundreds of books. That's not my discovery. But what is interesting is that 1,000 years ago, in the commentary of Rashi, we find that he wrote 1,000 years ago, he wrote that every 1656 years, a Phoenix number, every 1,656 years, the world is destroyed. All right. It's pretty interesting. This is what he said. The 10 patriarchs of Genesis add up to 1656 years. We've all seen 1656 very, very prominent in the chronometry of the Great Pyramid. I might show that chart here in a little while. 1656 is 552 times 3. It's 3 Phoenix cycles. Remember, the Great Flood happened. The sun was born. Then everybody lost faith in the sun when the sun died again 552 years later in the Ogygian flood, Ogygian Deluge. Yeah. Quit writing on pyramid text. 25 years of darkness. Civilization starts waking up. They start writing on coffin text. Why? Because everybody died. They wrote on coffin text. Now they're mummifying everything. They have this obsession with the dead in Egypt. This is what they're doing. So 552 years later was 1135 BC. What happened then? The whole Mediterranean world died. This is when Atlantis was destroyed. The Sea People's Federation gone. 1135 BC. Again, 552 years later. Thales predicts the darkening of the sun, but it's not the only thing that happened. Other things happened in 583 BC. But we'll get to that in a minute. So this number that was thrown out by Nostradamus, 1242, if you duplicate that, you get 2448. This 2448 number has haunted researchers because 2448 is the exact amount of years, according to Aristarchus, one of the most learned men of the ancient world, educated in Alexandria. Aristarchus wrote that every 2484 years, our world is destroyed in a cataclysm. Where did he get that information? It's divisible by 138. Where did he get that information? This was confirmed in the writings of Censorinus in the 3rd century AD. But it's insane. It's insane that these ancient scholars were in possession of this detailed specific information. 1926, one of my favorite authors. I got his book right here, back here on the shelf somewhere. The Great Pyramid is Divine Message. He wrote 1926, engineer David Davidson. He wrote this book. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Matter of fact, two of my moderators are going to receive these books. I'm so far behind, guys, but I got packages already set out. I just got to finish putting them together. For all my moderators are getting packages. But let's see. Yeah, David Davidson published from his calculations of the Great Pyramid's internal rectilinear timeline. He looked at all the geometrical arrangements in the pyramid, and he published in his book in 1926 that the Great Pyramid is focused on the number 2484. I'm not making that up. It's in his book. The Great Pyramid measurements, because he believed it was a calendar of the world, and he thinks that the Great Pyramid is identifying the number 2484, something that we need to pay attention to. Of course it is. It's a Phoenix number. According to Aristarchus of Samos, it's the number for Cataclysm. So another Phoenix number that we know from Vatican archives is that the Boudic calendar that was hidden when the Vatican agent it was Dionysius Exiguus in 526. He according to them in 526 he developed the Anno Domini calendar and backdated it. Get this, he didn't backdate it the way he was supposed to. He backdated it using a what's called a Pascal period or a Paschal period of 532 years, completely arbitrary. But it took him back to what he thought was going to be the birth of Jesus, and he started the Anno Domini calendar. But the church specifically hired him. He's an agent to do this. He was a scholar and rewrite all kinds of histories and create a new calendar for the church, Anno Domini, to hide an older calendar that the church didn't want the public to know about. I have a whole video on this. I show the sources on it. It's the Boudic calendar of 552 years, which we know of as the Phoenix cycle. The church wanted to hide it, and they did. And the reason they hid it is because for 25 years, the world was destroyed. And the church did not want anybody else to come into possession of this cycle and know about this huge cycle. Yeah, that's crazy. 522 AD is when that 25 years began. It's called the Great Justinian Darkness. It started the Dark Ages. So who am I missing here? Oh, also in the year 1658, Archbishop James Ussher. I have his book up here too. I've showed it to you guys in the past. He wrote Annals of the World, and he's the reason most Bibles have inaccurate chronologies in them. But it's okay. Everybody copied Archbishop James Ussher from 362 years ago or so. His book was the leading authority of the time. When it comes to AD and BC dating, he was terribly off. But he used Anno Mundi dating. And his date for the Ogygian Deluge was 2208 Annus Mundi. And he's dead accurate. He even mentions Ogygian Deluge occurred in the year 2208 of our world. Dead accurate. 2208 is divisible by 138. It was 2,208 years after the Adam and Eve reset of 3895 BC. Dead accurate, but for totally wrong reasons. That's crazy. Also, a dark stain on my on my research is Dr. Barry Wormkessel. Let me explain. Dr. Barry Wormkessel, I sent him a lot of my research. He totally ignored me. The reason I did it is because my publisher found his research and he was publishing Phoenix numbers. And he believed that there's a rogue planet out there called Vulcan, which is the subject matter of one of my videos about all these researchers in the 1800s. And Vulcan periodically appeared and caused all kinds of destruction cycles in our world. And it's really interesting because two of the numbers in his Vulcan cycle was 3,312 and 4,968. Both of them are Phoenix numbers. Both of them are divisible by 138. I was explaining to Dr. Barry Wormkessel that, hey man, I've already done this research. I'd like you to look at it. I didn't say it to him, but I went way farther than he did on his material. But because he was using sophisticated telemetry and he was using computer stuff and he was using NASA data, he was using all this stuff, he totally, absolutely refused to believe that I found all these things in my researches and old books, and he literally blew me off. So that's Dr. Barry Wormkessel. Also, in 1624, historian Montesinos, who was like a, what was his name? I'm thinking, man, I can't remember. He was like half Spanish, half Inca. His name was Montesinos. He ended up being an awesome historian of Inca antiquities, but he specifically wrote in 1624 that the Inca acknowledged a 2,070-year timeline. That's amazing. 2070. They acknowledged a 2070-year timeline. That's divisible by 138. It's 414 times 5. Is also the year that the Great Flood occurred on the Phoenix chronology. The Phoenix chronology actually begins 414 years before the Adam and Eve reset of 3895 BC. So, yeah, the Great Flood of Noah was technically the year 2070 of the Phoenix chronology. So, one of my favorite researchers, you guys know, Hans Bellamy, who basically got a lot of his material from Hans Horberger, an Austrian engineer, and talking about the time before the moon appeared, talking about ancient cataclysms. Hans Bellamy has written so much about Phoenix without even knowing about Phoenix. It's amazing the material he put together. But in his research, he showed that the ancient Mayan calendar has embedded within it another calendar, and he didn't know why, but he said that calendar was 2,760 years, and it's astonishing. To me, it's astonishing. 552 years times 5. It is divisible by 138. 2,760-year Mayan calendar. Of course, the Mayan calendar would embed a 2,760-year period because that's the year in between 2046, the end of the Mayan calendar, and when the year changed in 713 BC, when the sun retrograded 10 degrees. My Archaics veterans, I just hit you with another one, something you've never heard before. That's right. The year changed in 713 BC, which would have not been acknowledged to the following year, 712 BC. That's why a lot of ancient history say 712. But 2046 is the target date. But engineer David Davison shows that the geometry of the Great Pyramid shows that the final finished year of our world's stellosphere, he believed the stellosphere was a clock. And the last year of our stellosphere is 2045. When you take that into consideration, the year changed from 360 days to 365.25 days, which I have shown in 3 full data sets published on my channel and in my published books. When you take that into consideration, and that 713 BC was the 864,000th day of the Mayan long count, which started in 3113 BC, 6 complete backtons of 144,000 days done. Now, all of a sudden, 713 BC becomes something else for the Maya. it becomes a phoenix timeline of 2,760 years until the collapse of time, because that's what the Mayan 13 Bactans were about. At the end of the 13th Bactan, under the 13 heavens, time will collapse and unleash the occupants of the 13 hells. This is the Mayan cosmology. I hit my Archaics veterans with a new one. All right. That's Hans Bellamy. Gotta love him. Gotta love him. So how am I doing on time? 2 hours and 30 minutes, guys. I'm not done. You guys want me to keep going? Because I'm really not done. Just not done, guys. I didn't even know I'd been going that long. Holy shit. I'm sorry. I didn't know I was going that long. But I still got more data to cover. This is an important video. So let's get to these. I got a reference to Typhon. So remember, the Egyptians called Set Typhon. In the Egyptian pantheon, in the Egyptian cosmology, the sun came late. In Sumerian pantheon, the sun came late. They were latecomers. Why? Because the vapor canopy hid the sun. Under the vapor canopy, matriarchy was the rule. When the sun appeared, the patriarchy began emerging. It was after the cataclysm, after the flood, after the intermediate period of no development. Everybody's in survival mode. Everybody's just trying to live. After all that, the complete systemic collapse of their infrastructure, 2239 BC. Remember the Kish dynasty. I just posted this recently. This is for those who are still trying to cling to the Shar, Sumerian, Billy Carson, Zechariah Sitchin version of history. I just recently published this data point. The Ison chronology has been published by scholars. And these scholars acknowledge that the Sumerian king list says that the 7 kings ruled for 241,200 shars until the flood swept over the earth. Then 35,000 shars after the flood swept over the earth, kingship began again at Kish. What? If that's true, then the Great Flood must have been 37,000 BC. Well, we know that's not true, because all the historical record basically agrees that the 23rd, 22nd century, all the Chinese, everything, we know the Great Flood. We've got the chronology for it. We have more data points on the dating of the Great Flood than anything else. We can prove the Great Flood was in 2239 BC in the month of May, more than we can prove that the Civil War even happened. That's how much data we have from all different time periods, different languages, different sources, not just text, but also archaeology. So we have this amount of information. So what do the scholars find out? The scholars publish that the Kish dynasty began around the 21st century BC or 22nd century BC. How's that possible? It's impossible for 35,000 shars to be 35,000 years. It's not even possible for it to be 35,000 moons. But it is possible for it to be 35,000 turnings of the stars. Why? Because that's just 97.1 years. And that's exactly what academia has published. 97.1 or 0.2 years after the flood, the Kish dynasty began. So, having said all that, it's just absolutely, it's just remember, guys, I got a whole list of data points I save for debates. But I'm not getting any debates, so there's no reason for me to hold on to all that data. I've been releasing it slowly. So Typhon is the Egyptian apop. In Greek, like apop in apepi, that's the Egyptian. That's a later Egyptian word for phoenix. Typhon is also Typhoneus. Typhon is a son of Tartaros. Typhon is the son of the deep. So Typhon in Liddell and Scott's Greek lexicon is explained as a type of comet or a moving star. Remember, red star. Its cognates are typhlos, which means to blind in the sense of being misty or darkened, and the verb typhlu, which means to wrap something in smoke. Typhon of the Greeks is said to be so large that its head reached the stars. Typhon has wings so broad they blot out the sun. Typhon is the phoenix. It's even in the name, Typhon, Phene. The Phoenician Typhon was called Xiphon, or phoenix. In Hesiod's Theogony, we read that he was called dragon-headed Typhoneus. Also, Typhon to the Greeks was called the Prince of Darkness. Plutarch relates that Typhon was red, and Gerald Massey in 1883 wrote that the ancients believed that Typhon had a red tail. The Egyptian deity Set is also Typhon, or the phoenix. They're all the causer of disaster. Disaster means evil star. Seneca, in his work called Thyestes, he wrote that the sun was blotted out in the middle of the day. And he even mentioned Vesper, which is the planet Venus, as being separate from this event in the Ogygian Deluge. He mentions that Typhon destroyed the world and blotted out the sun and the moon to where they could give no light. This is very important, guys, because Emanuel Velikovsky made a critical mistake. I love his research. I love Worlds in Collision, Ages of Chaos, Akhenaten, and Moses. I love his books. I even like his unpublished books called In the Beginning. Listen, Emanuel Velikovsky was a trailblazer, but he made a critical mistake. He claimed that Venus came too close to Earth and caused all these destructions, for which I've showed you on my channel was purely Phoenix. One of the reasons he made that mistake is because the ancients made that mistake as well. And transcultural Venus and Phoenix were interchangeable, but it was completely accidental. When you look at them written on paper and you change the V to PH, you'll see exactly what I'm saying. Venus and Phoenix were interchangeable. But his theory, Emanuel Velikovsky's theory, does not hold water. He believes that Phoenix, I can't even talk right now. He believes that Venus, the planet Venus, which has a vapor canopy, he believes that planet was issued forth from Jupiter, and that the storm on Jupiter is the residual from shooting Venus out like a bullet. Okay, that's fine. The problem with that theory is that Venus is in a stable orbit. It's not Mercury's close to the sun. Its orbit is very circular. Venus is very circular. The ellipsis it makes is almost negligible. It's there, but it's almost negligible. However, if it was truly spit out of Venus that way, and if it truly came too close to Earth, it would not be in a circular orbit like it is today. It would be in a much more elongated elliptical orbit, and that's not what we find. This is why astrophysicists uniformly have refused to entertain Emanuel Velikovsky. It's a nice story, but you messed up. You claimed Venus did exactly what all your research shows Phoenix actually did. So Apollodorus reported that as Typhon grew to an incredible size, the gods would always rush to Egypt Man, we saw the same thing in the book of Tobit. In the book of Tobit, when an angel got dead on Asmodeus's demon ass, he caught out and tried to find protection in Egypt. Why do gods and demons go to Egypt to be protected from Typhon, the phoenix? I'm going to tell you why. Because I've been showing you on my channel that the secret to decoding the construct is encoded in the rectilinear measurements of the Great Pyramid. Been showing it to you. That's why. They knew. That's where the knowledge is. They also know it's a geodetic marker, meaning it is a monument that was built sufficient enough to survive every type of cataclysm. Why? What do you need a geodetic marker for? You need it because it marks something. It marks the location of something. And because it's not in the sky, then it must be underground. Set is recalled later in Egypt as Typhon, a name for the phoenix, as the Hyksos were worshippers of Set. Remember, the Hyksos were Israelites. The Egyptians, the native Egyptians, hated their guts, called them shepherd kings. But they were the children of Set. They were identified with Phoenix. Why? I'm going to tell you why. Because when 1687 BC happened, when the Ogygian Deluge occurred, it created a power shift. Foreigners were allowed to come into northern Egypt and take over. And when they did, they were the Israelites. They were called derogatory names like Hyksos, which is derogatory to the Egyptians. They were called the Hyksos. And the Hyksos, according to the historical record, were the sons of Set. Why were they sons of Set? Because they were opportunists. They used a cataclysmic episode to come in when Egypt was weak. Egypt had been weakened in a destruction caused by Typhon, which is Set. So the sons of Typhon moved in and occupied. Descendants of these Hyksos later became the Egyptian Copts. In the Egyptian Copts, in the Egyptian students of the Gnosis were also called the children of Typhon because they possessed the knowledge of the phoenix. How do we know they possessed the knowledge of the phoenix? Because the Nag Hammadi text says they did. So, let's see. In the older Greek traditions of the Great Flood, it's called the Bacchic for Bacchus. It's called the Bacchic tradition, and in these traditions, the Great Flood was caused by Typhon. It's the phoenix. Oh, on the forward and backward stuff, I've discussed that before. Like the Egyptian goddess Neith. On the northern part of the Mediterranean, among the Greeks, Neith becomes Athene. It's in reverse. The city of Athens of Greece is actually named after an Egyptian goddess, just like the Greek city of Thebes is named after the Egyptian Thebes. So Nostradamus was very, very specific. He said that now remember, using Mario Reading's date index, which I've published and showed, if you use the date index, it shows that Nostradamus actually dated his quatrains. And for the year 2040, he says there's going to be a very big troubling in the month of May. And he describes the sun going black. He describes the moon turning red, rocks falling from the sky. Nostradamus literally describes what's found in the sixth seal of the Apocalypse. The sun turns black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon turns red as blood, and the stars fall from the sky, while the kings and the rulers of the world hide among the mountains and pray to the rocks to fall on them, and hide in the caves of the earth from the face of the one in the sky. Now, this is the sixth seal of the Apocalypse, May 2040, 138 years after 1902. So, the month of May is also, according to the author, Father Molina, this is centuries ago, Father Molina put all these Incan traditions together, and he found out that the ancient Inca had venerated a 2070-year period, which is divisible by 138, but also the Inca began their year in the middle of May. And the following year, the year ended in the end of May. This is where we're going deep. We're going to be discussing things right now in the next 10, 20 minutes that have not been covered on my channel before. Many of the Mesoamerican monuments, pyramids, the different stelae, different roads, archaeologists have always been kind of perplexed why the sight lines on different temples actually show where the sun would be centered in the month of May. Yeah, somewhere on my channel, I don't remember where, but it's in my published books. I cite the actual source where I got it from. I show a photo of a pyramid in Central America with 138 dragon heads. Figure that one out. So we have like Thomas Campbell and other anthropologist historians over 100 years ago who wrote some really compelling things, like Robert Graves, Gerald Massey. I mention them all the time because they're experts at the topics I'm talking about now. And one thing that's been noticed is that there are a lot of ancient traditions from different cultures sharing the same practice. And one of those practices is very unusual. It's unusual because it's transcontinental, transcultural. And that practice is, in the month of May, different peoples honored the dead by placing red robes everywhere. Sometimes they went to grave sites, tomb sites, they went to tomb entrances. Sometimes they did it on church. Sometimes they nailed it to their front doors. They took red robes and they placed them in different areas of their community for one day out of the year in the month of May. And it was to honor the dead. Why? Why? This is very reminiscent of a most ancient tradition, something that goes back way before Egypt, way before Sumer, before Zep Tepi, the pre-flood world. We now enter the 1,344 years of the world before that we don't know anything about. All we know is that from the Adam and Eve reset, we're told that the world was populated. There were cities. Yeah, the tohu wabohu Hebrew term found in Genesis describing that darkness covered the face of the deep and all that, it's found one place else in the Bible, in Jeremiah chapter 4. And where tohu wabohu is found in Jeremiah chapter 4, it also says that the birds of the sky have fled and the cities are laid waste. It's describing a massive destruction that happened in the unremembered past. The Adam and Eve reset destroyed infrastructure in cities. It was so perfect that the Adamu and the Kava believed heavens and a new earth had been created. That's pretty destructive. This implies that there were cities. Cities implies there was a long time of urban development, of the development of technologies. Now, enter Cro-Magnon. Cro-Magnon believed in an afterlife. They were very sophisticated. They had button-down pants. They wore suspenders, trousers. Their women wore all kinds of things that could have been found in the palaces of Rome. It's like people just totally lost their infrastructure. They maintained how to do basic things. But the one thing that they did that doesn't make sense is they very carefully buried their dead with their possessions and made sure that the dead were comfortable. And then they covered them in red ochre. Red ochre. Not only the Cro-Magnon, but even up to the last 500 years in different places like northern England. In northern England, Nova Scotia and Labrador, and in eastern Canada, we have remnants of the ancient archaic culture that even up to the last 500 years were doing the same things that 2,000 years ago the red ochre people were doing, burying their dead with red ochre. Some anthropologists call them the red paint people. Where did this obsession with the color red come with people? Remember, Adam and Eve reset. The few survivors that lived were so shell-shocked and had completely forgotten the world before. 200-300 years later, they're living Neolithic totem societies, pre-pottery Neolithic. Here they are. Others later in history look back on them and literally said they came from the red earth. And remember, that reset was caused by the phoenix. What does the phoenix do? It layers our world in red earth. Red dust, red rain, and red mud falls from the sky every time Phoenix happened. Don't believe me? You better get into my published books and into my videos, because I show you where in 1902, the last time Phoenix was here, bathed our world in red matter. That was even scientifically examined. Yeah, a whole area is just absolutely buried in this red material. Harold T. Wilkins, studying the Ogygian Deluge and the Great Flood, he spent 20 years of his life researching all these archaeological sites in the Americas and all these ancient traditions. And he concluded that whatever destroyed the world in the Noahic flood returned and destroyed the world again in the Ogygian Deluge. Harold T. Wilkins in 1953 published that. How did he come to that conclusion? He came to that conclusion because both events are separated in time by centuries. He admitted that. They have different source materials, and yet they both explain that the world was blanketed in red dirt. As the sun darkened, the moon turned red, earthquakes destroyed everything, people were buried alive. This is what he found, not knowing a thing about the Phoenix phenomenon, not researching anything about Phoenix or having no crossover with my own research. His conclusions were completely independent. So that's Harold T. Wilkins. I've got both of his books right here. 1901, Sir Norman Lockyer studies Stonehenge, looks at the heel stone, looks at the whole the trilithons, how it used to be set up, does all his measurements, and concludes in publishing. Sir Norman Lockyer. Stonehenge is arranged to isolate the location of the sun in the month of May. You can't make this stuff up, guys. Just can't make this stuff up. The pyramid called Coricancha in South America. I believe it's a round pyramid. It's called a pyramid, but I believe it's round, like a cone, and it's half buried in lava. But archaeologists have determined that the sight lines for the pyramid focus on where the sun would be in the month of May. Yeah. So the most arcane symbolism regarding the phoenix has been passed down to us. Remember, phoenix was about the counting of the years, keeper of the calendar. In ancient Egypt, it was the phoenix palm. What is a palm? It's a straight pole. In ancient Egypt, Typhon, Neph was associated to the month of May. Do we have a carryover in Europe of that tradition, in the form of the maypole? When during the month of May, our ancestors sacrificed a victim to placate the gods? Isn't that the story of Perseus and Andromeda and Medusa and the Kraken? I have a whole video going deep on the whole Perseus narrative, showing you the clash of the Titans and the real Poseidonius narrative. This massive amount of stories from the Mediterranean about Perseus and the Kraken, and how the sun darkened in the flood that destroyed the city of Joppa, and how Argos needed to sacrifice a victim, and how the origin of the Medusa, the whole origin of the Medusa deal, comes from a real Bronze Age institution of human sacrifice, when a jellyfish is used against a victim to paralyze them. So the community can come forward and they can see that the victim is willing. What makes the victim willing? They're not fighting back. So they're laid on an altar, and the community gets together, and once a year they place a giant squid on the face of the victim. The giant squid eats their face, suffocates and kills the victim. The squid represents the sacrifice to Poseidon, the god of earthquakes, the god of horses. but it was done in the month of May during the Phoenix phenomenon when the sun darkens. The Kraken embodies the Typhon, the Phoenix concept. Perseus was the hero. Andromeda was supposed to be the sacrifice. She gets saved. So a different sacrificial victim is used and saves the day. So Perseus can be with Andromeda. How do we know that it was a different sacrificial victim that finally overcame everything? Because he cut off the head of Medusa and used Medusa's head against the Phoenix Kraken. And the sea calmed down. Medusa wasn't a snake head. It was the head of a sacrificial victim who had a giant squid attached to their face. So, yeah, this is you can read Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, and you'll find some more stuff on the giant squid stuff. But yeah, the maypole is the phoenix palm all over again. It's the phoenix palms. So, this maypole sacrifice and dance around the pole and all that. It was to placate the gods. It was to thwart a disaster. That's what it was. And the very fact that it was done in the month of May is quite prophetic, because this is Beltane. This occurs in the Celtic world as Beltane. Now, all throughout Celtum, it's a festival surviving today in the Irish traditions that acknowledges now, listen to me, I'm going to be very clear. It acknowledges the god of death. Yeah, man. All right. So Teotihuacan's architects laid out a visual representation of their astronomical knowledge. Teotihuacan, the giant pyramid of the sun in Mexico. You've all seen pictures of it. It's very impressive. It's not bigger than the one in the Great Pyramid because it's not a true pyramid. So I've had this argument with a lot of people who think they know what they're talking about. The Great Pyramid of Giza is solid masonry, 203 levels of core blocks all the way through at 454 feet at height, with an apothegm of 612 feet. The mass of the Great Pyramid as true masonry is unrivaled in the world. Anybody can take a hill and carve it into a pyramid and then put stones on the outer layer to make it look like a full pyramid all the way down. Anybody can build a temple, and when an earthquake collapses it, bury that temple and make a hill, and then build a pyramid over that hill. And then when it falls and collapses in different areas, add more concrete and lime and rocks, and then put beautiful dressing blocks on it and make it look like a pyramid. It still looks impressive, but it's not a true pyramid. It is a structure. It is a facade built over a substructure of repetitively smaller collapsed buildings. That's what you have in Mexico with the pyramids. So, but this enormous pyramid of the sun, which is like 4 structures, it's situated perfectly to align with a point on the horizon where the sun sets every year on May 17th. Phoenix veterans process that. On the opposite hemisphere from Giza is a gigantic pyramid complex with a road. And the sight lines for that pyramid isolate where the sun is going to set on May 17th. Yeah, that's just crazy. Absolutely crazy. Another data point here is that when Thales of Miletus, a Phoenician by remote descent, according to Herodotus, had predicted the darkening of the sun, and it did happen in 583 BC, for which he is today listed as one of the 7 wise men of Greece. When that event happened, it was the month of May. This is in the history books. After that, they built the monument of Yasilikaia to commemorate the peace treaty between the Medes and the Lydians when the sun darkened and stopped them from fighting. That battle took place in the month of May. Yeah, guys, I got all this material from all these different historical sources. And when you put it all together, it's literally telling the same story. Here's another interesting one. The historian Abydenus, citing the Babylonian Greek historian Berosus, wrote that Kronos revealed to Sisithros. This is the Assyrian Noah. Kronos revealed to Sisithros that there would be a flood on the 15th day of Dicios. Dicios is our month of May. Now, Alexander Heidel notes that some scholars believe that the second month is the second spring month called Zi and Iyar, which corresponds to the latter part of April and the early part of May. The reason this is important is because the book of Genesis does say that the great flood happened in the second month. But I've already shown you guys many times that the ancient Genesis year started at the vernal equinox, March 21st. When you start the year on the vernal equinox, March 21st, May becomes the second month. It all fits, guys. Every bit of it fits. Also, I recently posted this too, an Akkadian omen text. In the omen text, it says, if there is a darkening of the sun on the 16th day, the king of Arad will die, and the king of the Amuru will seize the throne. It's an omen text. Remember, this is beautiful, guys. The Amuru were the Hyksos, the ancient, what we call Israelites. The Amuru were the Westerners. The Egyptians hated them. Now, called them the Tamahu. Also, showed pictures of them in the Temple of Karnak. So here we have an omen text. If there is a darkening of the sun on the 16th day, the king of Arad will die, and the king of the Amuru will seize the throne. That's exactly what happened in Egypt. That's how the Israelites became in control of Egypt, ancient Egypt. They waited till Egypt was devastated in a Phoenix phenomenon event. Yeah, man, that's just crazy. You just can't make this stuff up. Here's another interesting thing. The Phoenix transits are always in the middle of the month of May. Astronomer Hoffman in 1764, looking through his telescope, literally saw the Phoenix cover 1/5 of the sun's surface. 1/5 in the astronomical minutes for the Royal Society. It literally says 1/5 of the sun's surface. This is why the other astronomers did not believe him. To cover up 1/5 of the sun's surface, the object must have been truly gigantic because it had to have been very far away. So Phoenix appears in the 5th month of our modern day calendar. It covered 1/5 of the sun's surface in 1764. And further of interest, and this is entirely coincidental, is that in the Chinese zodiac, the dragon, all the other ones are normal animals like a mouse, a pig, a horse, a monkey, but the dragon, the Feng, the Phoenix, is the 5th sign of the Chinese zodiac. Just can't make this stuff up. So in 3895 BC, we have the Phoenix appearing as a fiery flaming sword. The Phoenix chronology of 138-year periods is the biblical chronology, 100%. This is why it's very important to look at the biblical clues. Somebody went through a lot of trouble removing Phoenix from the Old Testament. I'm going to give you some examples. The fiery flaming sword, many scholars like Albert T. Clay and others, they have alternate translations for this. And the Hebrew literally infers in Genesis 1 as something flying over the deep. Wings. Now we're talking about Phoenix again, the Benu bird. So in the Babylonian Enema Elish text, we have the original for which Genesis is but a copy. I've explained this many times. Genesis is not old. The oldest we could ever assign Genesis is the 5th century BC, when the Jews were copying the Enuma Elish text, which was already 1,000 years old, in the libraries of Babylon after Nebuchadnezzar had occupied and deported the Jews from Jerusalem. So this is why Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in Babylon, because they had been deported. And the Jewish scribes, now having contact with the massive libraries of the Near East at Calneh in Assyria, Nineveh, and Nimrod in Babylon, they came across these stories. And one of the 7 tablet epics that they read was the Enuma Elish. And when they read that, they found out that the creation happened when the chaos dragon Tiamat had been attacked by a hero, and the chaos dragon split into many parts, and one of those parts became our world, and another part became, they had this huge cosmology, but our world was literally bathed in the blood of Tiamat. When Tiamat was destroyed, our entire world was bathed in blood. Sounds like a Phoenix phenomenon event? Remember, every 138 years, red rain, red mud, red dust. This is what happens. So the Genesis account of 7 stages of creation comes from the 7 tablets of the Enuma Elish, even in the order of the Enuma Elish. And this is not me telling you this. There are biblical scholars that have made these correlates. They have seen where this original Genesis material came from. And in Genesis, we find it very interesting. It specifically says that before the flood, there was no rain. Why? Because there's a vapor canopy. Didn't need the rain. Every morning and every evening, a dew basically liquefied everything, watered all the herbage, created pools of water, created streams, all that stuff. Every evening and every morning. Very humid world at night. But during the daytime, when the sun was passing over the sky, the sun couldn't be seen. Why? Because all the moisture goes back up, fills the mesosphere, creates a vapor canopy, and all you see is a lightness, but you don't see the sun. Native American traditions say it was the time of the dark purple light, when animals grew to huge sizes and people could commune with animals. It's a vapor canopy world. How do we have any confirmation of this? Of course, all the sun calendars appeared. The new sun gods appeared as soon as the vapor canopy collapsed. But even more so, Genesis is very specific. The rainbow appeared after the collapse of the vapor canopy. Under a vapor canopy, I don't think a rainbow would have been possible, or it wouldn't have been mentioned. But after the collapse of the vapor canopy, with the sun in the sky and sunlight now going through water droplets, rainbows are possible. So the survivors took the rainbow phenomenon as a sign from God that he would never flood the world again. It all makes sense when you put it together. Another interesting thing, we're told in Genesis that Adam lived for 930 years. I don't believe that. No, the Jews were fantastic at calendar codes. I've shown on my channel over and over and over and over how the Jewish scribes have encoded all kinds of esoteric information in what we have been led on the surface. It's all story. Adam died in his 930th year. Nope. 930 is the product of 792 plus 138. You guys know this. Archaics veterans know. The Nemesis X object periodicity is 972 years. I've shown the whole history of the world every time it appeared. It's 972 years. The Phoenix periodicity is 138 years. And I've shown the whole history of the world overlaid, both of them side by side. Right there. So Adam wasn't even a person. He is emblematic of a race. The Adamu. The Adamu came out of a world that was bathed in red. Adam comes from red earth. He's one of the naked survivors that survived that world. Total infrastructure collapse. 930 years of his survival is merely the combination of the periods of Nemesis X object and the Phoenix phenomenon, which continually in tandem, working together, retards human development through series of resets that are designed to look absolutely natural, but are not. They're cataclysm protocols, and they're always setting mankind back. That's what's encoded in Genesis. In Job chapter 26, verse 12, in Job chapter 26, verse 12 through 13, we have scholars translating the Hebrew and claiming that what we have today is not correct. That the passage actually refers to either phoenix or a dragon in the heavens, which by winding around the sun causes it to go dark. So those of you who want to read Job 26, 12 through 13, understand it that the original text, according to some scholars, one of them named Palmer and another one named Deluge, they're both claiming these are phoenix references to darkening the sun that have been changed to something so you won't recognize it. Yeah, I wonder how many other biblical verses have been completely altered so you don't. Think about Leviathan. According to these same scholars, Leviathan derives from the dragon which fights against the sun. That's Phoenix. That's the thing. That's the Benu bird. Typhon. Kraken. There it is. According to these same translators, Leviathan is a reference to the dragon which fights against the sun. In 1 Chronicles 21:16, just prior to a battle with the Philistines, David looked into the heavens and saw the angel of death standing between heaven and earth like a sword over Jerusalem. Remember the word sword. Remember, concerning angel of death and sword, we have 3895 BC, Adam and Eve reset. Phoenix appears as a fiery flaming sword. Now the subject matter is no longer Eden. Now it's Jerusalem. Same phenomenon, but this time it names the entity, angel of death. Remember, Phoenix is also called Prince of Darkness. So, angel is a cherub. The imagery of a sword is used in Genesis also when describing the fiery, flaming cherub with a flaming sword that blocked mankind's access back to Eden. It's all very interesting. Oh, excuse me. Just a couple curious little things here. I could literally go for another hour, but I'm not. I got a lot more notes. I'm not going to go that far because it's just a detail. It's just a detail of all the Phoenix years and what happened. But I've already got that spread through a bunch of videos. So somebody asked me about Rahu. I'm going to tell you now. In India, the dragon of darkness would have been the same as the Phoenix, is Rahu. Because Rahu's role was to prey upon the sun and the moon. It's no different than the Phoenix. It would be exactly the same. Just like the Anglo-Saxons, also of Indo-Iranian pedigree, the Anglo-Saxons described unusual phenomena as sky dragons or flying dragons, and this is reminiscent of Mother Shipton. We know her as Earthla Southiel. And Mother Shipton specifically said that 2 sky dragons were coming. The first one will be here 100 years after a world war. That's 2040. That's 2040. And he said the second one would come back almost immediately. That's 2046. She nailed it. She also described very graphically what Phoenix is going to do, which is what Nostradamus described, which is what Phoenix did in the ancient past. So we know it's going to do it again in the middle of the month of May in the year 2040. This isn't new. For anybody new to my channel, none of this is new. I have been publishing about this exact material right here since my first article was published in Paranoia magazine in 2004. So, yeah, this what's 20 years now. I've been publishing about the Phoenix for 20 years now. Let's see. In Greek antiquity, during the age of the Titans, remember the Titans were in the pre-flood world. How do we know? Because no Titans were born after that. After the collapse of, after the great flood of Deucalion, the Titans were old and very few in number. Some of them were banished into the west, or Tartaros, the far west. The world was full of giants and normal humans. The giants were the offspring of the Titans. But during the age of the Titans, which was the pre-flood world, the chief god recognized by the Typhon, by the Titans, was Ophion, the great dragon which wrapped around the sky. Ophion is Alpha Draconis. Alpha Draconis spins one time, and that's a shar, a turning of the stars, the old day count system. So the only thing left to really cover, there's really nothing left to cover. I mean, I've got so many directions I can go from here, but I've totally run out of time. 3 hours and 18 minutes, guys. I kind of broke a record, didn't I? For a Phoenix video. But yeah, Phoenix was the blood star. Phoenix was the red star, the bloody star. Yeah, Phoenix was the eye of Ra. Yeah, Phoenix was the winged disc, the Neph. Yeah, we have been misled on so many fronts by so many different people that we've trusted to teach us the truth. Zechariah Sitchin has given us many good things in his research, but he completely sent us down false corridors of knowledge, especially when it concerns calling everything Nibiru when it's clearly Phoenix, and he even mentions it's Phoenix. It just why have no researchers come forth with all this Phoenix data? I don't understand. It took an ex-con reading a bunch of old books in prison to even discover all this, but the information has been in the field from the beginning. And I'm going to tell you also that when I'm done reading all the books in my library and all the books in my other library and the books that I've got quarantined away because of their value, all the ones from the 16, 17, early 1800s, those books, I'm going to tell you now, I'm going to have so much more Phoenix material because it's everywhere. It's everywhere. But it just goes to show you there are knowledge filters in place. They've been censoring this information for a long time. But when you put it back together with, well, it just makes so much sense. Every bit of it fits. It's all perfect. But it's also the reason I'm a simulationist, because the Phoenix phenomenon would only really work in a controlled environment. I don't believe we live in a real solar system. I believe this is a perceived experience, not a real one. And when I look up at the sky, I see a stellosphere. I don't see a cosmos. Not anymore. Not with all the information that I've divulged. I've got videos that show you all the weird mechanical anomalous stuff that's happened in the sky, all the strange things that have fallen from the sky, all the aerial phenomena that do not make sense in a real cosmos. So that's my presentation. I'm rambling. That last cup of coffee she gave me must have been badass, because I just went off. Thank you, moderators. Love you to death. Johnny Wick, you're welcome. I did call somebody out for moderatorship. Grindel Dark, why don't you have a wrench? Grindel Dark, why do you not, man? All right, I'm about to change that. You should have had a wrench a long time ago. I called somebody else out that I've been seeing quite a bit. I don't remember the name now. Shiva Shampoo always remembers. He'll tell me in an email or something. George Abdulnor, you're getting close too, brother. I don't mean to leave anybody out, but there are many names that I recognize from almost every single video. I don't have an eidetic memory, but because I actually go through my comment sections, I have a pretty good one. So yeah, that sums this up. Love you guys. It was fun. We got some awesome videos on the way. Like I said, I mean it too. You guys think I'm playing, but I will always have 500 more videos in me.